A time existed when the galaxy did not fear the dark, not because darkness was weak, but because it had not yet learned how to speak. The Force was whole then, unbroken, undivided. It moved through stars without resistance, through living minds without demand. There were no names for it, no sides, no orders, only presence. Those who felt it did not call themselves Jedi. They did not see themselves as guardians. They were listeners, observers, wanderers who stopped only long enough to understand what the Force asked of them. They did not reach for it. They waited. On distant worlds, far from later history, small gatherings formed. Not temples, not academies, simple places where silence mattered more than teaching. Stone circles, open valleys, cliffs where wind never stopped moving. The Force was not summoned there. It arrived on its own. These early adepts believed the Force could not be owned, that it responded only to honesty. They learned this through quiet mistakes, moments where emotion bent reality without warning. A healer who tried too hard, a protector who feared loss, a child who felt anger before understanding why. The Force answered every feeling, even the ones no one wanted to admit, especially those. At first, this frightened them, not because the Force felt dangerous, but because it felt honest. It showed them parts of themselves they could not hide. Fear did not corrupt the Force. Fear revealed it. And slowly, a question formed. If emotion shaped the Force, then what happened when emotion went too far? No one asked this out loud, but everyone felt it. The Force was calm, but not passive. It reacted, sometimes gently, sometimes without warning. A storm would rise when anger lingered too long. Visions would follow grief that refused to fade. The adepts began to notice patterns, not rules, warnings. The Force did not punish, it reflected. This understanding brought peace, but it also planted doubt, because reflection meant responsibility, and responsibility meant restraint. Some accepted this easily, others did not. They wondered why the Force allowed such power if it was never meant to be used. Why feel it so strongly if action was always dangerous? This was not rebellion, not yet. It was curiosity, and curiosity has weight. As these beliefs spread, the galaxy around them began to change. Hyperspace routes formed, worlds connected, voices multiplied, civilizations grew louder, and with connection came fear. Fear of loss, fear of invasion, fear of being unprepared. The adepts felt it before anyone else did. The Force grew restless, not angry, uneasy. The listeners sensed a future where silence would no longer be enough, where balance would be tested by survival. They spoke of unity, of shared responsibility, of guidance. From these conversations, the earliest foundations of the Old Republic began to form, not as an empire, but as a promise, a fragile agreement built on trust, and the belief that understanding the Force could protect life. But beneath that promise, something else stirred, a quiet realization. If fear could shape the Force, then control might shape it even more. No one said it, no one taught it, but the thought existed, waiting, just like the darkness. They called themselves listeners, not because they were humble, but because they were afraid of being wrong. The Force had shown them enough to know this much. When they listened, it flowed. When they demanded, it resisted. So they built their lives around patience, around restraint, around the belief that understanding mattered more than action. These early Force users did not wear symbols. They did not mark rank. No one stood above another. The youngest voice could carry the same weight as the oldest, because the Force did not care for age, only for intent. Training was quiet, slow, sometimes painful in its stillness. They spent days in silence, learning the shape of their own thoughts, learning how fear entered the mind, how anger whispered before it ever shouted, how grief lingered long after loss. They were taught to feel everything and to act on almost nothing. This balance was fragile, but it worked for a time. The listeners believed the Force was a mirror, that if they were calm, it would remain calm. If they were honest, it would answer honestly. This belief shaped how they lived. They avoided attachment, not because love was forbidden, but because fear of losing it made the Force tremble. They avoided domination, not because power was evil, but because the need to control came from insecurity. The Force sensed insecurity immediately, and it responded without mercy. There were moments when this philosophy saved lives. Conflicts ended before violence began. Storms calmed when panic eased. Wounds closed when grief was accepted instead of denied. These moments reinforced their faith. They believed they had found the truth. But truth, like the Force, is never still. As more beings felt the Force awaken within them, the listeners grew in number. Not all of them were patient. Not all of them were content with waiting. Some asked difficult questions. Why was power given if never meant to be used? Why feel the Force so strongly, if silence was always the answer? These questions did not come from malice. They came from fear. Fear of being helpless. Fear of watching others suffer while doing nothing. Fear of loss repeating itself. The listeners had no answers, only warnings. They spoke of balance, of consequences, of echoes that could not be undone. But warnings are not comfort, and comfort was what many sought. The galaxy was changing faster now. Worlds connected, borders formed. Wars began without the listeners' consent. They watched empires rise around them, felt the Force strain under fear that was no longer personal, but collective. Entire populations afraid at once, entire worlds trembling together. The listeners felt it in their sleep, in sudden visions, in moments where the Force surged without invitation. Something was building, and listening alone was no longer enough. Some among them began to intervene, carefully, quietly. A pushed thought here, a calmed mind there. Small actions meant to prevent greater harm. At first, nothing went wrong. Then one intervention lasted too long. One mind was held instead of guided. One moment of control replaced patience. The Force did not resist. It complied. And that frightened them more than failure ever had, because compliance felt easy, too easy. The listener who did this did not feel corrupted, did not feel consumed. They felt effective. For the first time, the Force bent cleanly, smoothly, no backlash, no warning. Others noticed. They did not accuse, they did not condemn. They simply watched and wondered. If the Force answered control, then what else could it answer? This was the moment the listeners began to divide, not into enemies, but into perspectives. Some believed restraint must become law, that guidance required structure, that unity needed rules. Others believed rules were already forming, and that rules would one day demand obedience. Neither side believed they were wrong. Both believed they were protecting balance, but balance was already slipping, quietly, patiently. The Force did not scream, it waited, and in that waiting, the future learned how to fracture. Fear did not arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as concern, as responsibility, as the need to protect. And the listeners felt it, changing the Force long before it changed them. Meditation grew restless. Silence no longer felt empty. It felt watched. The Force still flowed, but unevenly now, like water disturbed beneath the surface. Those who believed in restraint felt it first, a tightening, a resistance where there had once been ease. The Force was responding to something new, not hatred, not ambition, fear with purpose. Entire worlds began to panic together. Wars were no longer distant events. They were shared anxieties. And the Force carried those anxieties everywhere. The listeners could not shut it out. When they reached inward, they felt screams not their own. Grief from places they had never seen. Rage from beings they would never meet. The Force had become loud. Some could no longer sleep. Visions came without warning. Cities burning. Crowds running. Hands reaching out and finding nothing. These were not prophecies. They were reflections, the present echoing too strongly. Those who believed in guidance argued that listening was no longer enough, that balance could not survive without direction. They said fear needed boundaries, that emotion required structure. Otherwise, the Force would drown in chaos. Those who believed in restraint answered quietly. They said structure would become control. That control would become dependence, and dependence would change intent. The Force did not care what they believed. It reacted to what they felt, and what they felt was slipping. Intervention became more common, not openly, not yet. Subtle touches of influence, calmed leaders, hesitant generals, moments where decisions bent gently away from disaster. Every success made the next intervention easier, cleaner, less uncertain. The Force did not resist. It adjusted. Some began to feel something new, not corruption, confidence, the belief that they could prevent suffering, that if they acted sooner, harder, nothing bad would happen. This belief spread quietly. No one declared it doctrine, but it shaped behavior. Meditation became preparation. Listening became evaluation. Silence became strategy. The Force felt different now, still vast, still powerful, but no longer neutral. It leaned, and no one could agree on which direction. A young adept once asked a question that stopped an entire gathering. If fear shaped the Force, then why was fear treated as weakness? No one answered, because everyone felt the truth in it. Fear was honest. It revealed attachment, revealed desire, revealed what mattered. Suppressing it did not remove it. It buried it, and buried emotions did not disappear. They waited. Some listeners began to train differently. They taught discipline, focus, control of emotion rather than acceptance, not to erase feeling, but to command it. They said balance required strength, that strength required mastery, and mastery required authority. These words were not dark, they were practical, and practicality is dangerous when fear is involved. Others felt the Force recoil when this language was used, as if something ancient was listening, measuring. The Force began to respond faster, stronger. Small emotions caused larger effects. Anger sparked storms. Determination bent probability. The line between intent and outcome thinned. This frightened the restraint-focused listeners. They withdrew further, spent more time in isolation, trying to preserve what was slipping away. But preservation is also a form of fear, and the Force felt that too. The divide was no longer philosophical, it was emotional. Two ways of responding to the same pressure. One chose silence, the other chose action. Neither believed they were wrong, but the Force was changing regardless. It was learning, adapting, preparing, and somewhere within it, a new voice was forming. Not dark, not light, but hungry. The divide was never announced. There was no moment when the listeners chose sides. It happened the way fear always does, silently, through habit, through intention, through small choices repeated too often. Those who believed in guidance began to gather more frequently. They spoke of responsibility, of protection, of preparing the galaxy for what was coming. They believed the Force had revealed its truth, that balance was not passive, that it required direction. They did not see themselves as rulers. They saw themselves as caretakers. Those who believed in restraint felt something slipping beyond repair. They sensed the Force tightening around certainty, around belief, around the idea that control could replace trust. They warned that the Force answered emotion, not logic, that fear disguised as duty was still fear, but warnings were becoming whispers. The galaxy was too loud now. Civilizations grew faster than understanding. Technology leapt ahead of wisdom. Wars no longer waited for philosophy. Entire systems demanded protection, and the listeners who acted were praised, celebrated, trusted. The Force felt that trust. It responded with clarity, with precision, with power that no longer hesitated. Those who used it felt affirmed. They believed the Force had chosen them. That belief mattered more than they realized, because the Force reflects intent, and intent was hardening. From these gatherings came structure, not yet an order, but foundations, rules for training, expectations, hierarchy, not enforced by command, but by consensus, the belief that unity required agreement, that disagreement invited chaos. The restraint-focused listeners felt isolated. Their silence was mistaken for weakness, their patience for indecision. They withdrew further, hoping distance would preserve clarity. But distance only amplified the change. The Force no longer felt balanced. It felt aligned, pulled, as if responding to a center forming somewhere unseen. The first councils emerged quietly. Groups tasked with deciding when intervention was necessary, when silence was dangerous, when action was justified. Each decision was small, reasonable, defensible, but together they shaped a future. The Force adapted to this structure. It flowed more predictably when guided, more forcefully when directed. The listeners felt this as confirmation. They mistook cooperation for approval. The restraint-focused listeners felt something else, a coldness, a narrowing, as if the Force itself was becoming focused, less infinite, more selective. This frightened them more than chaos ever had, because focus can become obsession, and obsession always demands sacrifice. The word Jedi had not yet formed, but its shadow existed. A belief that those who understood the Force should guide the galaxy. That understanding created obligation. An obligation justified authority. From this belief, the Old Republic began to take shape, not as a government, but as a shared promise. A promise that order could protect life, that unity could prevent suffering. The Force did not resist this promise. It responded to it, which made it all the more dangerous, because the Force does not judge promises, it amplifies them. As the Republic's foundations spread, the listeners became symbols, mediators, protectors, voices of calm in violent times. The galaxy began to rely on them, and reliance is another form of attachment. The restraint-focused listeners felt the weight of inevitability. They sensed that once dependence formed, balance would never be the same. They tried to warn the others one last time. They spoke of echoes, of consequences that would outlive intentions. of the Force remembering everything. But fear had already learned to speak clearly, and it spoke through certainty. The Force grew quieter, not calmer, focused, as if listening to a single idea, waiting to see how far it would be taken. The Old Republic was born in hope, but beneath that hope, a crack formed, so small it went unnoticed, a belief that control could replace trust, and from that belief, everything else would follow. The promise of balance began to feel like restraint. What once felt protective now felt limiting. The Force had narrowed, not because it wished to, but because belief had narrowed it. The listeners who favored guidance grew certain that restraint invited weakness, certain that fear thrived in silence. They began to speak differently, not as wanderers, but as teachers, not as listeners, but as interpreters of the Force. They believed the Force wanted to be understood, and understanding required language, rules, training, discipline. Emotion was no longer something to observe, it was something to manage. Fear became a problem to solve. Anger became a flaw to correct. Attachment became a risk to prevent. These ideas did not feel cruel. They felt responsible. They felt safe. Those who believed in restraint felt unease. They sensed the Force pulling away from patience. It responded faster to command than reflection. This frightened them. They warned that control would change intent, that obedience would replace trust. But their voices no longer guided discussion. They slowed it. The galaxy was not slowing. Conflicts multiplied. Worlds demanded protection. And those who acted were trusted. Trust became authority. Authority reshaped the Force. Training halls formed. Codes were spoken. Meditation became instruction. The Force flowed more cleanly within structure. This was taken as proof. Those who questioned were asked to conform, not by threat, by concern. They were told fear was the enemy, that peace required suppression. Some accepted this, others did not. They felt emotion was truth. That passion revealed what restraint hid. They asked why fear was forbidden, why anger felt powerful, why the Force answered intensity. These questions unsettled the councils, because they had no simple answers, only consequences. Those who refused conformity were watched, then separated, then cast out. Not violently, quietly. They were told to leave, to find their own balance. The Force did not protest. It watched, and in watching, it learned something new. Division could focus belief. Belief could shape power. And power, once focused, rarely softened again. The exiles did not leave empty. They carried questions, uncertainty. They believed the Force had been chained. That emotion was not corruption, but truth denied. Their departure was calm, but its echo was not. The Force trembled briefly, then settled. The councils named this necessary, a sacrifice for order. They believed the threat had passed. They were wrong, because exile does not erase belief, it sharpens it. And somewhere beyond the Republic's reach, emotion was about to be spoken without restraint. The Force listened, and it did not turn away. History would later call this moment a schism. At the time, it felt like relief. Order had been preserved, silence restored. But silence does not mean peace. It means waiting, and the Force is patient. It remembers every division, every exile, every belief denied. The Republic believed it had survived its first test. In truth, it had only chosen a direction, and the Force began to follow that choice. The exiles traveled far from familiar stars. They sought places untouched by restraint. worlds where emotion could breathe, where power answered honesty. They did not yet call themselves anything, but names were coming. The Force felt it, a tension forming beyond the light, not darkness, not yet, something sharper, something honest, something that would no longer wait. The Force did not judge them, it followed them, and in following, it changed. The age of listening was ending. The age of belief had begun, and belief, once unleashed, does not remain gentle. The Force waited. So did the future. They would meet again, but never as one. The fracture was complete, and the galaxy would feel it, long after this moment passed, in silence, in waiting, in darkness. The exiles did not feel lost. They felt released. For the first time since the councils formed, the Force felt wide again, unfiltered, responsive. It answered them without hesitation. Emotion no longer needed permission. Anger did not wait its turn. Grief was not buried. Desire was not silenced, and the Force responded to all of it. At first, this terrified them. They had been taught fear was weakness, that anger was corruption, that passion led only to collapse, but nothing collapsed. Instead, the Force grew stronger around them, sharper, clearer, more alive. They began to understand something the listeners never accepted. Emotion was not noise. It was language. The Force did not recoil from intensity. It amplified it. When they focused anger, the Force surged. When they embraced desire, it bent closer. When they allowed fear to exist, it revealed paths hidden by restraint. This felt honest. And honesty felt powerful. They began to speak openly now, not in councils, but in shared conviction. They told each other what they had always felt but never said. That restraint was fear pretending to be wisdom. That silence protected nothing. That balance without action was surrender. They believed the Force wanted to be felt fully, without shame, without limits. This belief did not come from cruelty. It came from survival. They had seen worlds burn while listeners debated. They had felt suffering while councils waited. They believed hesitation was the true danger. So they trained differently, not to suppress emotion, but to sharpen it. Anger was focused into clarity, fear into awareness, passion into resolve. The Force rewarded this. It moved faster, struck harder, answered without delay. They mistook response for approval. The more they embraced intensity, the more the Force aligned around them. They felt chosen. Not by destiny, by truth. This truth spread among the exiles. They began to believe restraint was a lie created to protect the weak, that the Force belonged to those brave enough to feel it fully. And bravery, they believed, meant refusing to turn away from darkness. They did not call it darkness. They called it honesty. Some among them began to change, not physically, but inwardly. They grew quieter, more focused, less conflicted. Emotion no longer overwhelmed them. It obeyed. This control felt intoxicating. They began to experiment, pushing harder, holding longer, letting anger burn without release. The Force did not stop them. It adapted. Their abilities deepened. Their influence expanded. And slowly, almost unnoticed, their intent shifted. What began as freedom became certainty. What began as expression became dominance. They believed the Force answered strength, and strength, they learned, could be taken. The first acts of cruelty were small, a mind bent instead of persuaded, a will overridden instead of guided. Each time, the Force complied. Each time, it became easier. They told themselves it was necessary, that suffering prevented greater suffering. This reasoning spread, and with it, something colder entered their belief. The idea that some beings were meant to lead, and others were meant to follow. They no longer spoke of balance. They spoke of power, not openly, not yet. But the Force heard it. It always does. The exiles were no longer just separated, they were transforming. They still believed themselves righteous, protective, honest. They did not yet see what they were becoming, but the Force did, and it was already shaping them in return. Their passion had been spoken aloud. Now it echoed, across stars, across time, waiting to be answered. They refused to be quiet, not out of anger, but because silence now felt like submission. The exiles gathered in places the Republic had never touched. Ancient worlds, forgotten systems, planets heavy with the Force, but empty of law. Here, no councils watched them, no codes restrained them. Only belief remained. They spoke freely of what they felt, that the Force favored resolve, that hesitation weakened purpose, that strength deserved obedience. These ideas did not sound cruel to them. They sounded clear. They believed the listeners had mistaken fear for wisdom. That restraint was simply fear dressed as peace. The Force seemed to agree. It surged around their gatherings, responded to conviction, bent to command. This response hardened their belief. They were not being tested, they were being affirmed. Training intensified. Meditation was no longer quiet. It was deliberate, focused, directed. Emotion was summoned, not avoided. Anger sharpened awareness. Desire strengthened will. Fear became fuel. They learned to hold these feelings without losing themselves, or so they believed. The Force flowed strongly through those who showed certainty. It recoiled from doubt. This taught them a dangerous lesson. Doubt was weakness. Unity required obedience. Those who questioned were corrected. Those who resisted were overruled. At first, this felt efficient. Decisions were made quickly. Action replaced debate. Power answered without delay. They began to expand, not as conquerors, not yet, as influencers. Worlds on the edge of Republic space felt their presence. Local conflicts ended suddenly. Leaders changed their minds without knowing why. The exiles told themselves this was protection, that they were preventing chaos. The Force did not contradict them. It enabled them. With every act, their reach grew, their confidence deepened, and with confidence came hierarchy, not declared, assumed. Those strongest in the Force led, those weaker followed. This felt natural. The Force itself seemed to respond more strongly to command than consensus. The exiles stopped seeing themselves as victims. They were pioneers. The future, they believed, belonged to those brave enough to claim it. But claiming requires taking, and taking requires justification. They began to speak of destiny, of purpose written into the Force itself, that some were meant to rule, and others to be shaped. These ideas did not shock them. They felt logical, necessary. The first true atrocities did not come as violence. They came as decisions. A population relocated for stability, a culture altered for peace, a leader removed for the greater good. The Force did not resist. It supported. Each act became easier than the last. Emotion no longer guided action. It justified it. Anger became certainty. Fear became resolve. Compassion became selective. Those who suffered were told it was necessary, and necessity silences conscience. The exiles were no longer simply different. They were becoming something new. They still believed themselves righteous, protectors of truth, bearers of a deeper understanding. They did not yet see the shape forming around their belief, but the Force did. It felt the tightening of intent, the narrowing of purpose, the echo of domination. This was no longer rebellion. It was transformation. And transformation always leaves something behind. The exiles did not notice when empathy faded, when patience thinned, when power replaced listening. But the Force noticed. It remembers every choice, every justification, every moment where control replaced trust. The Republic felt a disturbance it could not name, a pressure beyond its borders, a belief growing stronger in exile. The schism was no longer a wound. It was a path, and the exiles were walking it without hesitation, towards something ancient, something waiting, something that would soon demand a name. Darkness did not announce itself. It observed. It waited. The exiles believed they had escaped restraint. In truth, they had entered something older. The worlds they settled were not empty by chance. They were quiet because others had left them behind, because something lingered there. The Force felt different on these planets, heavier, thicker, as if it remembered being used. The exiles did not call it darkness, they called it depth. They felt the Force answer more completely here. Emotion carried farther. Intent left deeper marks. They believed they had found truth untouched by fear. But the Force does not forget. It carries echoes. And these worlds were full of them. As time passed, the exiles noticed a change in themselves. Not sudden, not violent, subtle. Meditation no longer brought peace. It brought focus. Silence no longer revealed understanding. It sharpened desire. The Force began to reward patience differently, not by balance, by anticipation. Those who waited felt power gather. Those who planned felt it obey. This taught them something dangerous, that waiting was not weakness, it was preparation. They began to shape their belief around this idea. Power did not need to be loud, it needed to be inevitable. The Force seemed to agree. Their influence grew without confrontation, without war. Republic worlds felt pressure they could not trace. Allies doubted each other. Leaders hesitated at critical moments. Nothing could be proven. Nothing could be named. The exiles were learning to move unseen. They believed restraint had failed because it was passive. They would not repeat that mistake. They would wait. They would prepare. They would let the galaxy weaken itself. This belief brought calm, a terrible calm. Emotion was no longer raw. It was disciplined. Anger was stored. Fear was measured. Desire was sharpened into intent. The Force responded beautifully, not with chaos, with alignment. Those strongest among them felt something new, not just power, purpose. They believed the Force was guiding them toward dominance, not conquest, control. Control without resistance. The idea of patience became sacred. To act too soon was wasteful. To reveal intent was foolish. The exiles stopped expanding openly. They withdrew further, letting stories fade, letting myths soften. The Republic believed the schism had ended, that the threat had dissolved in exile. This misunderstanding was cultivated. The Force learned to hide its voice. It did not surge anymore. It whispered. Those attuned to it felt clarity without noise, certainty without conflict. This was not peace. It was compression. Belief folding inward, becoming denser, heavier. The exiles no longer needed agreement. They needed obedience. Hierarchy solidified without declaration. Those who questioned were corrected, then removed, quietly, without spectacle. The Force did not resist. It adapted. It always does. What began as rejection of restraint had become something colder, more deliberate. The exiles no longer sought balance. They sought inevitability. They believed the Force itself would carry their will forward. That time was their ally. That the galaxy would eventually submit without knowing why. This belief settled deep, and in settling, it shaped something new. A doctrine without a name, a philosophy without mercy. Darkness did not rage. It waited, learning patience from the exiles, learning focus, learning how to survive unseen. The Force felt the shape forming, an answer to restraint, an answer to fear, not chaos, order, but an order born from domination. The first great schism did not end with exile. It ended with silence, and silence, when fed by belief, becomes power. The galaxy would not feel it yet, but it was already too late, because darkness had learned the one lesson restraint never taught: how to wait. Hatred did not begin as rage. It began as memory. The exiles remembered every warning ignored, every silence chosen over action, every life lost while councils waited. Those memories hardened, and hatred gave them shape. In exile, belief stopped drifting. It condensed, focused, turned inward. They no longer spoke of balance. They spoke of truth. That the galaxy did not fall because of darkness. It fell because of weakness. They believed strength was the only language the Force truly answered. Everything else was delay. On ancient worlds steeped in power, they found remnants of older civilizations, ruins built by those who had once bent the Force without apology, stone carved with symbols of domination, echoes of rituals that did not ask permission. These places felt familiar, as if the Force had been waiting for them to return. The exiles studied these remnants carefully, not as students, as inheritors. They learned that power could be transferred, stored, taken. Pain was not an accident in these teachings. It was a tool. Suffering sharpened focus. Fear clarified intent. Hatred sustained will. They did not recoil from these truths. They embraced them. From belief came doctrine. From doctrine came order. The word Sith began as a whisper, not a title, a direction. Those who followed it believed the Force was meant to be dominated, not shared, not balanced, dominated. They began to gather followers, not equals, subjects, beings drawn by fear, by desperation, by the promise of protection. The Sith offered certainty, obedience in exchange for survival, strength in exchange for submission. The Force flowed easily through this exchange. It responded to hierarchy, to command, to clear intent. This reinforced their belief. Power was not earned, it was taken. Those who resisted were broken. Those who complied were spared. The Sith did not see cruelty. They saw efficiency. Empires began quietly. A system secured here. A world subjugated there. No declarations, no banners, only control. Slavery became structure, not punishment. Foundation. Chains created order. Order created peace, at least for those who ruled. The Sith believed fear was the purest form of stability, because fear does not question. It obeys. They trained their acolytes harshly. Pain was constant, compassion rare. Weakness was punished immediately. Failure remembered. Those who survived became instruments. They learned to channel hatred without losing focus, to hold rage like a blade, sharp, precise. The Force rewarded this discipline. Abilities deepened. Lifespans stretched. Influence expanded. The Sith Lords rose not by trust, but by dominance. Each ruler claimed power through violence. Each apprentice learned through suffering. This cycle was not questioned. It was tradition. The galaxy began to notice. Trade routes vanished. Worlds went silent. Populations disappeared into labor camps. Stories spread, not of ideology, of terror. The Sith did not correct these stories. They encouraged them. Fear softened resistance before conquest ever began. When Republic forces finally encountered Sith-controlled space, they did not understand what they were facing. They saw order without mercy, unity without consent, power without restraint. And they felt something colder than war. They felt inevitability. The Sith did not seek endless battle. They sought control that would never be challenged. Hatred was no longer emotion. It was infrastructure. It held empires together. And as the Sith expanded, the Force itself seemed to bend toward them. Not because it favored them, but because they demanded everything it could give. The age of waiting was over. The age of domination had begun. Chains were not just restraints. They were lessons. Every slave learned this quickly. Pain was the first teacher the Sith trusted. Not cruelty for its own sake, but discipline. The Sith believed suffering stripped away illusion, that it revealed truth, that only through pain could weakness be burned out. Slavery became ritual. Entire populations were broken down slowly, names replaced with function, families separated, hope dismantled piece by piece. The Sith did not rush this process. Fear worked best when it was patient. Labor camps spread across conquered worlds, mines, factories, temples disguised as fortresses. The Force was present in all of them. It lingered in screams, in exhaustion, in despair that never fully ended. The Sith learned to draw strength from this atmosphere. They did not need belief from their subjects, only submission. Blood rituals emerged quietly. Not all Sith practiced them, but all respected them. These rituals were not symbolic, they were practical. Life could be traded for power, pain could anchor spells, death could be delayed. The Force answered these exchanges. It always answers sacrifice. The Sith Lords taught their apprentices this early. Power demanded cost. If you were unwilling to pay it, you were unworthy. Apprentices were forced to fight each other, not for honor, for survival. Those who hesitated were killed. Those who won were scarred. Scars were reminders. They taught obedience better than words ever could. Belief took shape inside this structure. The Sith believed hierarchy reflected reality, that the strong naturally ruled, that mercy invited rebellion. They saw compassion as a flaw the Jedi could not escape, and they used that flaw relentlessly. When Republic forces arrived to liberate worlds, they found traps waiting, hostages placed carefully, civilians turned into leverage, entire cities rigged to collapse. The Sith forced their enemies to choose, save the innocent, or stop the Sith. Either choice caused suffering. The Sith believed this proved their philosophy, that morality weakened resolve, that fear was the only reliable bond. They taught their subjects to fear them more than death, and it worked. Rebellions collapsed quickly, not because the Sith were everywhere, but because fear here spread faster than hope. Within the Sith ranks, loyalty was enforced through blood. Apprentices watched masters kill rivals. Masters tested apprentices with impossible tasks. Trust did not exist, only usefulness. If an apprentice grew too strong, the master prepared to strike. If a master weakened, the apprentice sensed it. This tension fueled growth, but it also guaranteed betrayal. The Sith accepted this. They believed betrayal refined power, that only the most ruthless deserved to rule. The Force responded violently to this belief. It surged during executions. It twisted during rituals. It lingered in places where hope had died. The Sith mistook this presence for approval. They believed the Force belonged to them now, that it had chosen domination over balance. But the Force does not choose. It reflects. And what it reflected back to the Sith was hunger. Hunger for more power, more control, more fear. The empires expanded faster. Worlds fell not just to armies, but to terror. Governors surrendered before fleets arrived. Systems cut ties with the Republic out of fear alone. The Sith did not need to conquer every world. They needed the galaxy to believe they could. Fear became currency. Blood became law. Chains became order. And the Sith empires stood tall on foundations no one dared touch. The galaxy learned a new truth, that peace enforced by terror still felt like peace. Until it didn't. Fear did not spread like fire. It spread like silence. Worlds fell without battle. Systems surrendered without warning. Messages stopped coming. The Sith understood something the Republic never did. That terror did not need spectacle. It needed certainty. Certainty that resistance was pointless. The Sith empires were not unified by culture or loyalty. They were unified by fear. Fear of masters. Fear of punishment. Fear of being replaced. This fear shaped everything. Cities were designed to intimidate. Spires rose high and sharp, visible from orbit. Temples loomed over streets like shadows that never moved. Every structure reminded the population who ruled. The Sith Lords rarely appeared in public. They did not need to. Their absence was more frightening than presence. When a Sith Lord did arrive, it was deliberate, calculated. Executions were held rarely, but remembered forever. The Force moved differently in these places, heavy, oppressive. Those sensitive to it felt suffocated, as if the air itself demanded obedience. The Sith believed this was proof of control. They taught that fear sharpened the Force, that peace born from terror was stable. For a time, it was. Trade continued under watch. Labor never stopped. Order was absolute. The Sith ruled through layers. Overlords commanded systems. Lords commanded worlds. Apprentices enforced obedience. Every level feared the one above. This created efficiency. No debate. No delay. Orders flowed downward. Suffering flowed upward. The Sith empires expanded rapidly, not through conquest alone, but through collapse. Republic allies turned on each other. Border systems defected preemptively. Neutral worlds begged for protection. The Sith offered it, at a cost. Entire cultures were erased quietly. Languages banned, beliefs outlawed. Identity was dangerous. Uniformity was survival. The Sith believed individuality caused weakness. That difference invited rebellion. So they removed it. The Force responded strongly to this suppression. It twisted around controlled populations, fed on despair, amplified dominance. The Sith mistook this reaction for harmony. They believed the Force favored order without mercy. That balance had been a lie told by the weak, but beneath this empire of fear, something else grew. Resentment, silent, patient. The Sith did not fear resentment. They believed fear crushed it. They were wrong. Resentment learned to hide. It waited. Jedi survivors felt these worlds from afar, like wounds in the Force, places where pain never ended, where hope struggled to breathe. They sent warnings to the Republic. They spoke of Sith empires rising beyond the outer rim, of darkness organizing itself. The Republic hesitated. It remembered ancient wars, feared repeating them. This hesitation allowed fear to deepen. The Sith exploited it. They staged attacks designed not to win battles, but to destroy morale. A single fleet destroying an undefended world, then vanishing. The message was clear. No one was safe. The galaxy began to change its behavior. Trade slowed. Travel routes emptied. Communication grew cautious. Fear reshaped daily life. The Sith empires did not need to rule everything. They needed to be believed. Belief became reality. Within Sith space, stability held. Outside it, panic spread. The Sith believed this imbalance proved their superiority. That fear was more powerful than trust. But fear is unstable. It fractures. It corrodes. The Sith ignored the signs. They were too focused on expansion, on control, on proving the galaxy wrong. They did not notice the cracks forming within their own hierarchy. Masters watching apprentices too closely. Apprentices growing too patient. Fear does not create loyalty. It creates opportunity, and opportunity invites betrayal. The empires stood tall, but they were hollow, built on terror, sustained by suffering, waiting for the moment fear would turn inward. It always does. The galaxy did not understand fear at first. It thought fear meant invasion, fleets in orbit, cities burning. The Sith taught it something worse. Fear could exist without warning. A world could vanish between hyperspace jumps. A leader could disappear mid-sentence. A system could fall silent forever. No announcement followed, only absence. The Republic received reports it could not verify, fragments of transmissions, survivors who spoke in broken sentences. They described rulers who did not negotiate, armies that did not retreat, Force users who did not hesitate. The Jedi felt it most clearly. Across the Force, something pressed outward, cold, focused, intent, not chaos, purpose. They meditated and found no calm, only tension, as if the Force itself were holding its breath. When Jedi scouts finally reached the edges of Sith-controlled space, they returned shaken. They spoke of worlds stripped of culture, of populations living in quiet obedience, of temples where pain lingered long after screams had faded. These were not battlefields. They were systems built to endure terror. The Sith did not meet the Jedi openly. They watched, measured, tested. Small clashes erupted along the borders, never decisive, never accidental. The Sith studied their enemies carefully. They learned how Jedi hesitated, how compassion slowed response, how mercy created openings. They exploited every weakness. A Jedi saving civilians while Sith fleets escaped. A Jedi refusing to strike first. A Jedi retreating to preserve life. Each moment confirmed the Sith belief. That fear made enemies predictable. The galaxy learned to fear not just the Sith, but the idea of them. Merchants altered routes. Governments hid information. Worlds armed themselves without coordination. Trust collapsed. The Sith did not need to attack every system. Fear traveled faster than ships ever could. Rumors exaggerated reality. Reality confirmed rumors. The Sith became myth. Not just rulers, inevitable shadows. Children were taught their names as warnings. Adults spoke them only in private. The Force reflected this fear everywhere, even on worlds untouched by Sith rule. It grew restless, distorted. Force-sensitive beings experienced visions they could not explain. Dreams of chains, dreams of kneeling crowds, dreams of eyes watching from darkness. The Sith felt this spread and welcomed it. Fear was proof of influence, proof of success. They believed the galaxy was finally learning the truth. That power did not need permission. That order could be forced. That peace could be built on terror. For a time, they were right. The Republic struggled to respond. Its systems were too divided, its values too cautious. The Jedi debated strategy, doctrine, ethics. The Sith did not debate. They acted, and action shaped the era. The Old Republic began to fracture under pressure. Alliances weakened, confidence eroded, fear entered politics, fear entered decision-making. The Sith had achieved something unprecedented. They had changed how the galaxy thought, not through law, through dread. But fear is never stable. It demands constant reinforcement, and reinforcement demands escalation. The Sith did not notice how much effort this required, how much control cost, how much hatred needed constant feeding. They believed fear was eternal. They forgot one thing. Fear teaches survival, and survival breeds resistance. Somewhere within the oppressed worlds, hope began to hide, quietly, patiently, just as the Sith once had. The Force felt this shift, a counter-pressure forming, faint but real. The galaxy had learned terror, but terror had also taught it something else, that no empire built on fear can ever rest, because fear never sleeps. It waits, and it remembers. The first clash did not feel like the beginning of a war. It felt like recognition. Two forces meeting that had always been moving toward each other. The Republic had prepared fleets. The Jedi had prepared themselves. But preparation is not the same as readiness. When the first Sith armadas emerged from the dark, there were no speeches, no demands, no warnings, only movement. Ships advanced with purpose, not haste. Formations tight, silent. The Republic responded as it always had, with coordination, with debate, with restraint. That restraint cost them worlds. The first battles were brief and brutal. Entire systems fell in days, not because the Republic was weak, but because it hesitated. The Sith did not. They struck supply lines first, communication hubs, hyperlane junctions. They understood war as disruption, not conquest. Jedi commanders felt the Force strain as soon as blades were drawn. The darkness was organized, focused. This was not chaos. It was intent. Lightsabers met red blades for the first time in generations. The sound echoed across ruined cities and burning skies. The Jedi expected rage. They found discipline. Sith warriors fought without hesitation, without mercy, without doubt. Each strike carried belief behind it, the belief that victory was inevitable. The Republic lost its first major fleet above a border world whose name history would later forget. It burned quietly. No heroic last stand, no message sent home, just wreckage drifting among stars. The galaxy felt it. Fear rippled outward as systems realized what had begun. The Jedi Council debated response. Escalation meant committing fully to war. Restraint meant more losses. They chose balance. The Sith exploited it. They attacked in waves, retreated, returned somewhere else, never allowing the Republic to rest, never allowing certainty. Worlds changed hands repeatedly. Cities rebuilt only to burn again. Civilians learned to pack quickly, to leave behind what could not be carried. Hope became portable. The Jedi fought on dozens of fronts, their numbers stretched thin, their convictions tested. They saved who they could. But saving everyone was impossible. Each failure left a mark. Each decision to retreat echoed inside them. The Sith noticed. They learned how Jedi thought under pressure, how compassion slowed them, how loyalty divided focus. They set traps accordingly. Entire battalions of Jedi vanished in ambushes designed around mercy. A distress call from civilians, a delayed response, a closed hyperspace route. Silence followed. The Republic adapted slowly. Defenses hardened. Fleets grew larger. But growth brought new problems. Command structures bloated. Decisions delayed. The Sith thrived in this confusion. They fractured Republic alliances, turned systems against each other. Every victory the Republic claimed felt temporary, because the Sith did not seek decisive endings. They sought endurance. They believed war was not something to win, it was something to maintain. As long as the galaxy remained afraid, the Sith remained powerful. The Jedi began to understand this too late. They realized this conflict would not end with a single battle or a single generation. The Sith were not invading. They were settling in, building war into the structure of the galaxy. The Force reflected this endless clash. It grew turbulent, restless. Meditation brought visions of fire instead of calm. Young Jedi learned combat before philosophy. Knights aged faster. Masters grew weary. Victory no longer meant peace. It meant time. Time to rebuild. Time to breathe. Time before the next assault. The first clash did not end the war. It defined it. A conflict without closure, without rest. A war that would outlive those who fought it. And in that realization, something quietly broke. The belief that balance could be restored quickly. The galaxy had entered an age where survival mattered more than resolution. And the Force, once again, learned how to endure suffering. Worlds did not fall cleanly. They fractured. Each battle left something behind that could not be repaired. Cities were rebuilt over ash, temples over mass graves, homes over silence. Some planets changed hands so often that no one remembered who they belonged to. Republic banners replaced Sith sigils, then disappeared again. Civilians learned not to celebrate liberation. Liberation was temporary. The Sith understood this weakness. They targeted worlds that mattered emotionally, cultural centers, trade hubs, places where memory lived. When those places burned, the galaxy felt smaller. The Jedi returned to planets they had saved before, only to find them ruined again. This repetition wore them down, not physically, spiritually. Each return felt like failure. Each evacuation felt like surrender. The Force reflected this exhaustion. It felt heavy on these worlds, scarred. Places of battle never truly quieted. Even years later, Force-sensitive beings felt echoes. Pain trapped in stone, fear embedded in air. Children born on these planets dreamed of fire without knowing why. The Sith used this damage deliberately. They knew broken worlds were easier to rule. Populations traumatized by constant war accepted control more readily. Security mattered more than freedom. The Republic promised protection. The Sith promised certainty. Certainty won more often. Jedi healers worked endlessly, not just mending bodies, trying to ease minds. But there were too many wounds. Some could not be touched by the Force at all. Loss layered on loss until numbness replaced grief. That numbness frightened the Jedi more than anger ever had, because numbness does not resist, it accepts. The Sith noticed this too. They established garrisons on worlds already scarred, places where despair was familiar. Their presence felt like an extension of the damage. Nothing new, just more of the same. Republic counteroffensives reclaimed territory. But each victory revealed ruin. Infrastructure destroyed beyond repair. Populations displaced permanently. Winning meant inheriting devastation. The Jedi began to question strategy. Was saving a world meaningful if it could never recover? Was liberation enough when nothing remained to liberate? These questions had no answers, only consequences. Some Jedi grew hardened. They focused on stopping the Sith at any cost. Others withdrew inward. The Force no longer brought clarity. It brought reminders, visions of past failures, faces of those they could not save. Worlds that never healed became warnings, living proof that war had no clean edges. The Republic adapted its tactics, stronger defenses, more aggressive fleets. But aggression came with its own cost. Collateral damage increased, lines blurred. The Jedi felt themselves changing, forced to choose between mercy and survival, between restraint and necessity. The Sith thrived in this pressure. They wanted the Jedi exhausted, disillusioned, questioning themselves, because doubt weakens resolve, and war feeds on doubt. Entire generations grew up knowing nothing but conflict. To them, peace was a rumor, a story elders told quietly. They trusted neither side. They simply endured. The force around these generations felt muted, as if hope itself had learned to whisper. Some worlds tried to remain neutral. They closed borders, cut communication, hid. The Sith punished neutrality. The Republic could not always protect it. These worlds learned a cruel lesson. There was no outside. War found everything. The Jedi began to mark certain planets as lost, too damaged to hold, too costly to save again. Leaving them felt like betrayal, but staying felt futile. These decisions haunted the Order, because Jedi were trained to preserve life, not to calculate acceptable loss. The Sith saw this hesitation as weakness. They believed the Jedi still clung to ideals that no longer fit reality, and in many ways they were right. Worlds that never healed became scars on the galaxy, permanent reminders that war does not end when battles stop. It lingers. It reshapes identity. It teaches survival instead of hope. The Force absorbed these lessons, carrying them forward, waiting for the next conflict to awaken them again. Because in this war, nothing truly ended. It only paused. Victory stopped meaning what it once had. In the early days, winning a battle brought relief, celebration, a sense of progress. That feeling did not last. As the war dragged on, victory became quieter, shorter, less certain. A system reclaimed meant one less front to defend. For a while, a fleet destroyed meant fewer Sith ships, until replacements arrived. The Republic learned that success no longer promised peace, only delay. Jedi commanders stopped speaking of triumph. They spoke of survival, of holding lines long enough to evacuate civilians, of retreating before losses became irreversible. These were not defeats, but they did not feel like victories either. The Sith understood this shift immediately. They knew the Republic measured success in lives saved. So they made saving lives costly. Battles were drawn out deliberately, fought near population centers, near refugee routes. Every choice forced the Jedi to hesitate. Every hesitation was exploited. The Jedi saved thousands, but the ones they could not save stayed with them, in dreams, in meditation, in the Force itself. Survival began to reshape doctrine. Training emphasized endurance over enlightenment, combat over contemplation. Young Jedi learned to fight before they learned why. Masters worried about this change, but war did not wait for philosophy. The Force reflected this shift. It felt strained, as if pulled in too many directions at once. Meditation no longer brought stillness. It brought planning, calculation, preparation for the next inevitable clash. The Sith thrived in this environment. They believed war was the natural state of the galaxy, that peace was an illusion maintained by fear of conflict. Now that illusion was gone. They pressed harder, not to win, but to exhaust. They targeted supply lines relentlessly, starved fleets, isolated outposts. Republic commanders learned to expect loss, to plan around it. Entire strategies were built on acceptable casualties. This language troubled the Jedi deeply, because it sounded too much like Sith thinking. But necessity demanded it. Survival required compromise. The Republic still believed in eventual victory, but no one could define what that victory looked like anymore. The Sith empires remained fractured, warring among themselves even as they fought the Republic. This internal conflict prevented them from overwhelming the galaxy completely, but it also made them unpredictable. A Sith Lord might abandon a front to pursue a rival, then return months later stronger. The Republic could not rely on patterns. Every pause felt temporary. Every silence felt dangerous. Jedi began to age faster, not in years, in weight. Responsibility piled on responsibility. Each night carried the burden of worlds. Some grew distant, others hardened. A few broke, leaving the Order quietly, unable to carry the cost anymore. The Sith noticed these fractures. They targeted disillusioned Jedi, whispered promises, offered certainty in place of doubt. Most resisted, some did not. These defections terrified the Jedi Council, not because of numbers, but because of what they represented. The war was changing people, on both sides. The Force felt crowded with unresolved conflict. Every battle added layers, memories that did not fade, pain that did not resolve. Victory, when it came, felt empty, because it did not end anything. It only postponed the next loss. The Republic learned to celebrate endurance. A year without major losses was success. A decade of survival was triumph. This shift in perspective marked a quiet defeat, because when survival replaces victory, hope shrinks. The Sith believed this proved their philosophy, that fear and endurance were stronger than ideals, that the Jedi would eventually collapse under their own compassion. They waited for that moment. The Jedi waited too, for a sign the war could still be ended. Both sides waited, because waiting had become the only certainty left. The war no longer asked who would win, it asked who would last longer, and the galaxy learned how heavy that question could be. The war did not stay contained, it multiplied. Every battle created survivors. Every survivor carried memory. Every memory carried anger. Children who fled burning worlds grew into soldiers. Refugees became commanders. Loss shaped loyalty more than belief ever had. The Republic noticed a pattern too late. Each war ended by exhaustion, not resolution. No treaties held long. No victory removed the cause, because every conflict planted another. The Sith understood this cycle instinctively. They encouraged it. When one Sith empire weakened, another rose beside it. Rivals fought rivals, then turned outward again. The Republic was forced to respond to multiple threats at once. There was never a single enemy, only fronts. The Jedi found themselves fighting wars they did not start, on worlds they barely understood, against Sith Lords whose names changed with each generation. History blurred, battles blended together. What mattered was not who struck first, but who survived long enough to strike again. The Force reflected this repetition. It felt scarred, as if conflict itself had become familiar. Meditation revealed not visions of peace, but patterns, endless loops of rise and collapse. The Jedi began to understand something terrifying. This war was teaching the galaxy how to fight forever. Each generation inherited unfinished battles. Old grudges became new causes. The Sith thrived in this inheritance. They trained apprentices using the stories of past wars, teaching them what the Republic feared, where the Jedi hesitated, which worlds broke first. War became tradition, passed down like doctrine. The Republic tried reform, new alliances. She knew fleets, new strategies. Each reform created unintended consequences. Allies resented Republic command. Fleets drained economies. Systems rebelled under pressure. The Jedi were pulled into internal conflicts. Peacekeeping turned into suppression. This troubled them deeply. because they were becoming what they opposed. The Sith used this against them. They framed the Republic as hypocritical, the Jedi as enforcers, not protectors. On some worlds, this argument found traction. People who had suffered under both sides stopped caring who ruled. They only wanted stability. The Sith offered it brutally. The Republic offered it conditionally. Conditionally felt uncertain. Uncertainty felt dangerous. The Force felt this shift. Alignment was no longer moral, it was practical. Just some Force-sensitive beings grew up outside Jedi influence entirely. They learned the Force through conflict, through survival, through fear. These individuals did not see the Jedi as saviors. They saw them as another faction, another army. This perception haunted the Order, because Jedi identity depended on trust, and trust was eroding. The Sith did not need to conquer the Republic outright. They needed to change how the galaxy thought about power. War did that for them. It taught populations that strength mattered more than ideals, that peace was temporary, that authority came from force. Each war reinforced these lessons. The Republic survived, but it changed. More militarized, more cautious, less hopeful. The Jedi survived, but they carried scars, not just from battle, from compromise, from decisions that felt necessary but wrong. The Sith empires rose and fell repeatedly. None lasted forever, but each left something behind: techniques, beliefs, hatreds. These remnants ensured the next conflict would come faster and harder. The war never truly ended. It paused, shifted, rebranded, but its presence remained. A constant pressure shaping politics, culture, and belief. The galaxy learned to live with war, to plan around it, to expect it. That expectation became its own weapon. The Sith had succeeded in one crucial way. They made conflict normal. And when war becomes normal, peace becomes fragile. The Force felt this normalization settle deep. It adjusted, it always does, preparing itself for future echoes, because every war leaves behind lessons, and the galaxy had learned too many. This was not a single conflict. It was a cycle, one that would repeat until something finally broke it, or until the galaxy broke itself trying. Revan did not enter history as a conqueror. He entered it as an answer. The Republic was tired of waiting. Worlds burned while councils debated. Jedi spoke of patience as systems fell. Revan listened and chose differently. He was a knight trained in restraint, raised on balance, shaped by rules meant to survive endless war. But war had already taught him something else. That hesitation killed. That delay cost lives. That survival demanded action. Revan saw fronts collapse, not from weakness, but from caution. He watched fleets retreat to preserve doctrine. He watched worlds abandoned to protect ideals. The Force felt loud to him, not chaotic, urgent. It pressed against him with unfinished cries, with fear that wanted direction. Revan did not reject the Jedi teachings. He believed they were incomplete. Compassion mattered, but so did resolve. When the Mandalorian threat rose, the Council hesitated. History warned them. War had already taken too much. Revan refused to wait. He believed saving the Republic required speed, decisive strikes, leadership unburdened by endless debate. Others followed him, not because he demanded it, because he acted. He did not promise peace. He promised survival. In battle, Revan was precise. He studied enemy movement, learned how fear guided decisions, turned momentum into weapon. The Force answered him readily, not because he commanded it, because his intent was clear. Victories came faster under his command. Routes reopened, worlds stabilized. The Republic praised him quietly. The council worried silently. They sensed change, not corruption, direction. Revan began to carry the war inside him. Every loss sharpened his focus. Every victory raised the cost of stopping. He justified escalation as necessity. Each step made the next easier. The Force reflected this tightening. It felt aligned around him, focused. Revan did not feel darkness. He felt purpose. He believed the war could end, that someone had to carry the weight fully. As his campaigns pushed outward, restraint fell behind. Choices narrowed, options closed. The Jedi Council called him back, asked for patience, for unity. Revan heard fear in their voices, fear of what he represented. He did not turn back. He believed the Republic needed a savior who would not wait, and saviors, once chosen, rarely stop. The war did not end, but it changed, because Revan had entered it. And the Force, once restless, she began to move with him. He became a symbol before he became a leader, a figure others projected hope onto. That weight followed him into every decision. The more he succeeded, the less room he had to doubt. Doubt looked like betrayal when lives depended on certainty. Certainty became his shield. The Force continued to answer, not gently, efficiently. Each choice trimmed away alternatives. Each order simplified outcomes. Complexity felt like weakness. Revan began to see the war as a single problem with a single solution. End it quickly. End it completely. He believed mercy after victory would heal what Force had broken. He believed control now would prevent chaos later. These beliefs felt reasonable. They felt necessary. They felt right. The Jedi sensed a narrowing future around him, a path becoming difficult to leave. They feared the cost of stopping him. They feared the cost of letting him continue. Revan did not see a trap. He saw responsibility. And responsibility, once accepted, rarely loosens its grip. It would carry him forward, through victories that felt heavier than defeats, toward choices that would demand more than obedience. This was how heroes were shaped in endless war, not by darkness, but by certainty that refused to bend. That certainty was the first fracture, small, invisible, and impossible to undo once the Force began to echo it. History would remember the sound, long after the moment passed, without mercy remaining. War shaped him faster than training ever had. Each campaign stripped away doubt. Each order replaced hesitation with habit. Revan learned the cost of command through absence, through names removed from reports, through planets saved too late. He adapted, not emotionally, strategically. Battles became equations. Lives became variables he tried to preserve, sometimes failed to. The Republic praised results. Stability returned to key routes. The Mandalorians were pushed back. But victory demanded escalation. Revan expanded authority. He coordinated fleets beyond council oversight. He centralized decisions. Speed saved worlds. It also silenced objections. Jedi who questioned tactics were reassigned, not punished, removed from momentum. Revan told himself this was mercy. That debate cost time. Time cost lives. The Force felt cleaner this way, focused, responsive. In combat, he anticipated outcomes before they formed. Enemies felt predictable. Resistance collapsed when pressure was applied correctly. He began to trust patterns over people, systems over individuals. This made him effective. It also made him distant. Those closest noticed change. His voice steadier, his patience thinner. He slept less, meditated less, planned constantly. The war no longer existed outside him. It lived in his thoughts, in calculations that never stopped. Revan believed he could end it decisively, not by endless fighting, by breaking the enemy's will. He authorized strikes meant to terrify, targeted symbols, infrastructure, supply. Civilians were warned, sometimes, often too late. Each choice felt heavier than the last, but stopping felt worse. The Force did not resist. It adapted to his clarity. This adaptation worried the Council. They sensed alignment narrowing around him, a single solution crowding out others. They sent envoys, messages urging restraint, reminders of doctrine. Revan received them, acknowledged them, ignored them. He believed doctrine lagged reality, that war demanded evolution. Followers grew more devoted. They trusted his certainty, needed it. He did not cultivate loyalty. It formed naturally around success. Command became expectation. Expectation became authority. The Republic relied on him, quietly, increasingly. Revan carried this reliance like armor, heavy, restrictive. He could not step back without collapse following. At least, that is what he believed. The Force echoed this belief. It rewarded commitment, punished doubt. Small compromises accumulated. Acceptable losses recalculated. Moral lines adjusted incrementally. Nothing felt like betrayal. Everything felt necessary. The Mandalorian threat waned. The war neared conclusion. Instead of relief, Revan felt unease. Victory would remove purpose, expose questions long deferred. He feared what came after, not peace, but judgment. The Council would ask for answers, for restraint, for surrender of authority. Revan did not feel ready. He looked beyond the known fronts, toward unexplored regions, toward sources of endless conflict. If the galaxy kept producing war, then war itself had a root. Revan decided to find it, end it, completely. This decision felt like clarity, like destiny, aligning. The Force grew quiet around him, attentive. War had forged him into a savior. Now it was asking for more. And he did not refuse. He would move beyond borders, drawn by fear, beyond maps, shaped by compromise, into shadows the Republic avoided. There, he believed, lay the source, ancient, enduring, a threat older than any single war. The Force did not warn him away. It followed, curious. Those who marched with him felt purpose sharpen. They trusted his vision without seeing its end. The Council felt distance grow, not measured in stars, but in belief. Revan stepped forward. The galaxy did not know it yet, but a line had been crossed, quietly, irreversibly. This choice would echo, across time, across lives, across the Force itself. And the war, still unfinished, waited to answer him, not with peace, but with a truth he was not ready to carry. It would break him before it saved anything, or so history would claim. The journey changed him before the destination ever could. Beyond Republic space, certainty began to thin. Stars felt older. The Force felt deeper. Revan sensed layers beneath familiar currents, ancient impressions, beliefs long abandoned but not erased. He did not feel darkness. He felt history. Worlds here remembered different wars, conflicts older than the Republic, older than Jedi doctrine. The Force did not speak clearly. It murmured, fragments of intent without language. Revan listened and began to question. If the war had repeated for generations, if empires kept rising from the same shadows, then perhaps the enemy was not a faction. Perhaps it was a pattern. This thought unsettled him, because patterns could not be defeated with fleets, or treaties, or mercy. They required control. The Force seemed to respond to this idea, not approving, not resisting, observing. Revan encountered teachings, unlike Jedi restraint or Sith domination. concepts built around inevitability, around shaping outcomes long before conflict began. These ideas did not feel evil. They felt efficient. He began to see the Force as something that could be guided on a grand scale, not moment to moment, but across eras. This perspective fractured his thinking. The Jedi taught balance within the present. The Sith sought power within the self. Revan began to think in futures. He imagined a galaxy where war could not restart, where resistance collapsed before forming, where control prevented suffering entirely. The Force reflected this widening vision. It felt stretched, pulled between possibilities. Revan's meditations changed. He no longer sought calm, he sought clarity, and clarity revealed uncomfortable truths. The Republic was fragile by design, built on consensus, slow to act. The Jedi were bound by conscience, reluctant to impose. Both were vulnerable. Revan concluded that mercy without authority prolonged suffering, that freedom without control invited endless war. This belief did not feel dark. It felt responsible. He did not abandon compassion. He redefined it. Compassion, he believed, meant ending chaos permanently, even if that required force, even if it required sacrifice. The Force responded more strongly to these thoughts. It aligned around decisive intent, around long-term vision. Revan felt himself standing between extremes, not light, not dark, above them. This belief isolated him. Those who traveled with him sensed distance growing, not in command, in understanding. They trusted him. But they could no longer follow his thoughts. The Force around Revan became quiet, dense, focused inward, as if it were being compressed. He began to see others differently, not as individuals, but as components within a system, valuable, replaceable. This frightened part of him. Another part accepted it, because systems did not hesitate. They functioned. The split was subtle. One part of Revan still remembered lives saved, faces, names. Another part saw outcomes, probabilities, acceptable loss. These two minds did not argue. They coexisted, uneasily. The Force mirrored this division. It did not tear him apart. It stabilized the fracture, as if allowing contradiction was useful. Revan realized something then, that the Force did not demand moral purity. It responded to coherence, clear intent, unified direction. If his intent was peace through control, then the Force would follow that path. This realization was the true turning point, not betrayal, not corruption, understanding. He believed he had seen what others could not, that he carried knowledge too dangerous for the Republic. This belief justified secrecy, distance, autonomy. The Jedi Council sensed the shift, but could not name it. They felt Revan slipping outside familiar alignment, neither light nor dark, something colder, more deliberate. The Force itself seemed unsure how to classify him, and so it adapted, allowing contradiction to exist within one will. This adaptation would echo far beyond Revan, because a mind that can hold both restraint and domination can justify almost anything. Revan did not feel broken, he felt complete. But completeness built on division does not remain stable. It waits, and eventually it demands resolution. The Force felt that future approaching, slowly, inevitably, like a choice that could no longer be delayed. He returned as someone the Republic no longer recognized, not because his face had changed, but because his certainty had. Revan came back carrying answers the Council did not ask for, solutions they feared, control disguised as salvation. He spoke of ending war forever, of removing uncertainty from the galaxy. of shaping peace before conflict could begin. The council heard danger. Revan heard delay. They urged restraint, asked for surrender of command, for trust in balance. Revan believed balance had already failed. The war had proven it. He saw the Republic as a system too fragile to survive mercy. The Jedi as guardians, unwilling to impose order. He did not hate them. He pitied them. This distance hardened quickly. Revan began acting without approval, deploying forces beyond mandate, seizing control of strategic worlds. Each move was justified as temporary, necessary, preventive. The Force did not resist, it aligned. Those who followed him felt clarity replace doubt, purpose sharpened into obedience. Revan became something more than a commander. He became a center. Around him, belief organized itself. The Republic felt authority slipping, not stolen, replaced. The Jedi confronted him, not as enemies, as guardians of a line he had crossed. Revan did not deny it. He believed the line no longer mattered. Their clash was not immediate, not violent. It was ideological. Revan argued that freedom bred chaos, that chaos bred suffering, that suffering demanded control. The Jedi argued that control without compassion became tyranny. Both were right. Both were too late. Revan's followers began to enforce order openly, suppressing dissent, rewriting governance. Resistance was met swiftly, quietly. The galaxy watched in confusion. A hero was stabilizing regions faster than the Republic ever had. But something felt wrong. Peace arrived with silence, with fear. The Force reflected this contradiction everywhere. Calm layered over dread. The Jedi felt the echo of ancient mistakes returning, patterns they had failed to break. They moved to stop Revan, not because he was evil, because he was convincing. The confrontation ended as history remembers it, with betrayal, with loss. Revan fell, not killed, broken, stripped of memory, of certainty. The Force itself seemed to recoil, as if unsure what to do with a mind that had held both sides so completely. The Republic declared victory. Relief followed, briefly, because the threat Revan represented did not disappear. It scattered. His followers vanished into the shadows. His ideas embedded themselves into doctrine and fear. The Jedi sensed something worse than a fallen hero. They sensed a lesson learned by the darkness, that a savior could become a threat without hatred, without corruption, only through belief taken too far. Revan's absence left a vacuum into which older shadows would soon move. The war he tried to end did not stop. It changed shape. His name became warning and myth. To some, a monster. To others, a martyr. To the Force, a fracture it would remember. Because Revan proved something terrifying. That the line between protector and tyrant is not crossed in anger. It is crossed in certainty. And certainty, once rewarded by the Force, rarely lets go. Revan was not evil. He was divided, and that division echoed outward, into doctrine, into memory, into the endless wars still to come. The galaxy survived him, but it would never forget what he revealed. That the greatest threat does not always arrive screaming from the dark. Sometimes it rises quietly, promising peace. Loyalty did not break all at once. It thinned, quietly. After Revan fell, the galaxy tried to breathe again. The Republic spoke of recovery. The Jedi spoke of healing. But the Force felt unsettled. Ideas do not die when people do. They linger. Revan's followers did not vanish with him. They scattered into fleets, into governments, into the Order itself. Some still believed in his vision. Others feared it. Many did not know what they believed anymore. The Jedi Council tried to restore unity. They spoke of discipline, of returning to doctrine, but doctrine sounded fragile now. Too many had seen what decisive action could achieve. Too many had survived because someone refused to wait. Trust began to erode between brothers and sisters of the Order. Small disagreements turned sharp. Tactical debates grew personal. Questions of loyalty replaced questions of strategy. The Force reflected this unease. Meditation brought interruptions, not visions, doubts. Some Jedi felt pulled toward control. Others recoiled from it completely. Neither side felt at peace. The Republic struggled to govern worlds reclaimed from Revan's influence. Populations resisted returning authority. They had tasted certainty. Jedi were sent to stabilize systems where trust had collapsed. Instead, they became symbols of division. Some worlds welcomed them as saviors. Others saw them as enforcers. This perception followed the Jedi everywhere. Inside the Order, lines began to form. Those who believed the galaxy needed stronger guidance, and those who believed restraint was the only path left. No one called these sides enemies, not yet. But loyalty began to feel conditional. A Jedi's allegiance was no longer assumed. It was observed. The Sith exploited this quietly, not through open war, through suggestion, through whispers that echoed Revan's logic, that the Council was weak, that unity required strength, that the Force rewarded certainty. These whispers found receptive minds, especially among those who had fought beside Revan, who had seen victory under his command, who remembered how the Force felt when hesitation vanished. They did not consider themselves traitors. They believed they were realists. The first defections were subtle. Jedi refusing recall orders. Jedi choosing to stay behind and govern. Jedi acting without Council approval. Each act was justified as necessary. Each act strained trust further. The Council attempted intervention, but conversations turned tense. Warnings felt accusatory. Authority felt questioned. The Order had survived war, but it had not survived certainty. The Force grew quieter during these exchanges, as if withdrawing from argument. This silence frightened the Jedi more than turbulence ever had, because silence meant distance. The Republic sensed conflict coming before it began. Alliances faltered again. Defense networks hesitated. Worlds feared another Revan, another savior who would decide for them. The Jedi were sent to prevent exactly that. Instead, they argued over who had the right to decide. Brother watched brother closely now. Every decision was measured, every action interpreted. Trust became fragile, and fragility breaks easily under pressure. The Sith waited. They did not rush this fracture. They understood something the Jedi did not want to accept, that loyalty built on fear of repeating the past is still fear, and fear always seeks certainty. The first open clash came unexpectedly, not between armies, between friends, a disagreement over authority, over command. Lightsabers ignited not in anger, but in refusal. The shock rippled across the Force. A line had been crossed, once, and once was enough. Because loyalty, once questioned openly, does not recover easily. The Jedi civil war did not begin with betrayal. It began with belief, two beliefs that could no longer coexist, and a force that no longer intervened to soften the divide. Jedi fought Jedi without banners, without declarations, without joy. The first battles were small, isolated, almost accidental. Two patrols crossing the same world. Two commanders giving different orders. Two beliefs refusing to yield. Lightsabers ignited with hesitation. Hands trembled. Voices cracked. No one wanted this, but no one stepped back. The Force felt wrong during these clashes, not violent, conflicted. It pulled both ways at once, as if unsure which intent to answer. Those who favored control argued necessity. That unity required enforcement. That hesitation invited chaos. Those who favored restraint argued conscience. That control would corrupt. That fear was already winning. Neither side felt dark. Neither felt pure. They believed themselves protectors, and that belief justified escalation. Skirmishes spread. Rumors traveled faster than ships. Systems whispered that the Jedi were turning on themselves. The Republic panicked. Command structures froze. Requests for mediation went unanswered, because mediators were choosing sides. Entire enclaves split overnight. Training halls emptied. Masters vanished with their students. Friendships ended in silence or in fire. Some Jedi struck first. Others struck only when cornered. But every strike echoed. The Force recorded them all. As casualties rose, language changed. Brother became opponent. Sister became threat. Names were replaced with positions. Rank replaced relationship. This made killing easier. The Sith watched with patience. They fed the conflict quietly, offering sanctuary, offering purpose. To some Jedi, the Sith sounded honest. They promised order. They promised certainty. They did not promise mercy. Battles grew larger. Fleets escorted Jedi forces now. Worlds chose protection over neutrality. Civilian deaths mounted. Each side blamed the other. The Jedi Code fractured under pressure. Different interpretations hardened into law. Law hardened into command. The Force grew colder, less responsive, as if retreating from contradiction. Some Jedi tried to withdraw entirely, to wait out the conflict. They were hunted by both sides. Neutrality was no longer tolerated. The war reached the core, then the rim. No region remained untouched. Former students hunted former teachers, using lessons learned in peace, applied in desperation. Victory in one system meant rebellion in another. No gain stayed gained. The Republic armed the Jedi openly now. What had once been guardians became soldiers. This change settled heavily, especially on those who remembered another time. The Force no longer guided instinctively. It responded only to forceful intent. This rewarded aggression, punished hesitation. The Jedi felt themselves changing. Not all resisted. Some embraced the clarity war provided. Others broke under it. When entire academies burned, the galaxy understood. This was no longer a crisis. It was a war. A civil war within the Order itself. And every strike made reconciliation less possible. Because memory does not fade during conflict. It sharpens. By the time the Jedi realized what they were losing, they no longer agreed on what could be saved. The Force watched, silent, cold, waiting for the conflict to decide its shape. Those last moments hardened positions. Messages became orders. Orders became absolutes. Hope thinned to procedure. Procedure replaced trust. The Jedi fought on, because stopping meant surrender, and surrender felt impossible. The Force did not intervene. It observed, learning what division required. By the end of the first year, the Order no longer spoke with one voice. Only echoes answered. These echoes grew louder than truth. They would guide the next battles, and the ones after that, until certainty was all that remained. Peace felt distant. Unity felt unreal. The war had chosen its shape, and it would not soften. Not yet. Not soon. Not without loss greater than victory. The Force waited for what would break first. Faith, or the Order itself. It already knew the answer. Time would reveal it. slowly, without mercy and without regret, ever, in silence, always, watching, waiting, endlessly. On, victory arrived without celebration. It crept in quietly. One front collapsed, then another. Then, silence replaced reports of battle. The Jedi who favored restraint began to prevail. Not because they were stronger, but because exhaustion had spread too far. Too many had died. Too many worlds had burned. Too many choices had already crossed lines no one wanted to see again. The Republic declared the conflict contained, stability restored, unity reaffirmed. The words felt empty. The Jedi stood among the ruins of their own order, temples damaged, archives incomplete, ranks thinned beyond recovery. Those who had embraced control were defeated, captured, or driven into exile. Some vanished into Sith space, others disappeared into the Force itself. The war ended not with resolution, but with attrition. The survivors gathered. They spoke of lessons learned, of mistakes corrected, of returning to balance. But conviction was gone. They had won, and they did not know what that meant anymore. The Force felt distant during these assemblies, not silent, withdrawn, as if it no longer trusted declarations. Jedi who once spoke with certainty now hesitated. Every doctrine questioned, every rule re-examined. They feared repeating the same fracture. This fear shaped the future. Training became stricter. Attachment discouraged more firmly. Emotion treated with suspicion. Not because emotion had caused the war, but because emotion had made choices difficult. The Order chose safety over understanding. The Republic supported this shift. It wanted predictability, control without another Revan. Jedi were assigned roles more carefully, watched more closely. Trust was replaced with oversight. This felt responsible. It also felt cold. The Force reflected this caution. It no longer surged around Jedi gatherings. It flowed thinly, carefully. Some Jedi felt relief. Others felt loss, because something had been sealed away. The victory had removed immediate danger, but it had not healed division. Those who survived carried memories they could not share, because speaking them reopened wounds. Silence became habit. The Sith influence receded for a time, their agents withdrawn, their plans delayed. They had learned enough. The Jedi Civil War had taught them what they needed, that Jedi could be broken without destroying them. That belief could fracture loyalty faster than fear. That victory weakened certainty more than defeat. The Republic mistook survival for success. It rebuilt fleets, repaired trade routes, declared the era closed. But the Jedi felt something was missing. Not power, trust in themselves. Every decision now carried weight of history. Every deviation felt dangerous. They avoided bold action, avoided strong leadership, because strong leadership reminded them of Revan. The Order grew cautious, careful, slower. The galaxy stabilized, but it did not feel safer. The Force grew quieter in response, not because balance had returned, but because expression had been restricted. It flowed around rules instead of through intent. This made it predictable. It also made it weaker. The Jedi told themselves this was peace, a peace maintained through vigilance. But peace built on fear of repeating the past is fragile. The Sith understood this perfectly. They had lost territory, lost agents, lost momentum. But they had gained knowledge. They had seen the Jedi hesitate, seen them fracture, seen them win and still doubt. Victory without conviction is not victory. It is pause, and pause creates opportunity. The Jedi Civil War ended with the Order intact, but altered, more unified in appearance, more divided in spirit. They had saved the Republic, but they had lost certainty, and certainty, once lost, does not return easily. The Force felt this absence settle into the galaxy, a hollow space where confidence once lived, waiting, because wars do not truly end when battles stop. They end when belief is restored, and belief had not survived the victory, not this time. The Force did not scream after the war. It withdrew. Across the galaxy, sensitive minds felt less guidance, less warmth, fewer answers. Meditation brought stillness, but not clarity, calm without direction, silence without comfort. The Jedi told themselves this was balance returning, a settling after chaos. They welcomed the quiet, yet the quiet carried weight. Where the Force once surged during compassion, it now responded cautiously. Where it once warned, it now observed. The Order adjusted, rituals shortened, emotions monitored, attachment discouraged with firmer language. These choices felt prudent. They also narrowed experience. Young Jedi learned control before understanding, discipline before trust. The Force mirrored this narrowing. It flowed cleanly through restraint, but resisted spontaneity. Some felt relief. The war had ended. The noise was gone. Others felt loss, a sense that something alive had stepped back. Worlds rebuilt under careful oversight. Peacekeepers replaced commanders. Stability became the highest value. The Republic praised predictability. It funded structures that reduced risk. The Jedi accepted their role. Guardians again, limited, watched. This arrangement held. But the Force grew colder, not dark, not hostile, distant, as if responding to caution with caution. Visions faded, intuition dulled. The living current felt thinner. Masters noticed students struggling to feel what once came easily. Guidance required rules, not resonance. The archives grew, interpretations hardened. Where uncertainty once invited listening, it now invited correction. The Order avoided extremes, avoided bold action, avoided leaders who inspired too strongly, because inspiration reminded them of fracture. The Sith felt this change immediately. In hidden places, they sensed less resistance, not weakness, absence. A Force less expressive leaves space. They waited. The Jedi mistook quiet for safety. They believed containment meant healing, but containment suppresses as much as it protects. Across scarred worlds, people slept without dreams. Force-sensitive children went unnoticed longer. The galaxy stabilized, yet felt muted. The Force was conserving itself, not retreating forever. Recovering. Cold does not mean dead. It means preserved. The Jedi did not sense the preparation. They believed the war had taught restraint. The Force had learned patience. It had seen belief fracture and rebuild into caution. It had felt power constrained by fear of repetition. So it adjusted. It flowed around doctrine. It avoided amplification, waiting for intent strong enough to draw it out again. The Order settled into routine. Centuries would pass this way. A quieter era, a colder balance. The galaxy survived. But it did not heal, because healing requires openness, and openness had been sacrificed to prevent another civil war. The Force accepted this trade, for now. It would allow caution to harden into habit and habit into doctrine. It would watch the Jedi measure themselves, then measure the galaxy, choosing prevention over possibility. The Force would keep its distance while fear dressed itself as wisdom, not to punish, to observe. Because observation teaches patterns, and patterns reveal endings. In this calm, seeds slept. Ideas conserved their strength. Across hidden worlds, embers waited for breath. The quiet was not peace, it was compression. And compression stores energy. When released, it reshapes everything it touches. Eventually, someone would feel the cold and mistake it for clarity. They would reach, not knowing the quiet had prepared the answer. The force would respond then, not gently, but precisely, ending the pause and beginning another lesson. History would mark this stillness as recovery, but the force would mark it as waiting, patient, and exact, counting heartbeats until resolve returned. Silence held the line, unbroken. Power changed shape after the war. It no longer wanted command, it wanted more. The force, once quiet and restrained, began to hollow in places, not torn, drained. Some Sith felt it first, not the emperors, not the conquerors, the ones who listened for deeper answers. They sensed absence where energy should have been, a thinning that did not heal. This frightened them, and fear became desire. They reached into the force and felt it respond differently, not by bending, by tearing away. When they took, the force did not resist, it diminished. The sensation was intoxicating. Power no longer flowed through them, it accumulated. They felt fuller, heavier, hungrier. These Sith did not speak of empires. They did not care for rule. Control required maintenance. Consumption required only will. They began to experiment, draining enemies in combat, pulling strength from the dying, from the terrified. The force recoiled briefly, then adapted. It always does. Entire battlefields were left silent, not from death, from emptiness. Survivors described a chill that did not fade, a sense that something essential had been taken. The Sith who caused this felt changed, less emotional, more focused. Pain sharpened them, hunger sustained them. They no longer sought followers, they attracted them. Those nearby felt weaker, dependent, drawn towards the absence. This created devotion without loyalty, fear without command. The Sith realized something critical. Power could feed on power. The Force itself could be consumed. This belief shattered old hierarchies. Why rule a galaxy when you could devour it? These Sith abandoned politics, abandoned doctrine. They pursued sensation, the feeling of fullness after draining a world, the silence after a scream echoed too long. They learned to cause suffering deliberately, not for cruelty, for resonance. Pain amplified the drain. Fear opened pathways. Entire populations became fuel. The Republic did not understand what was happening. Reports spoke of planets falling quiet overnight. No battle, no resistance, just absence. Jedi sent to investigate returned shaken. Those who returned at all. They spoke of places where the Force felt wrong, like a wound that would not close, like a scream frozen mid-breath. Meditation failed near these worlds. The Force did not answer. It had been eaten. These Sith were no longer bound by ambition. They did not want thrones. They wanted sensation to continue. Hunger replaced ideology. Champagne replaced purpose. The Force itself became prey. This terrified even other Sith, because hunger has no ceiling. It does not stop when satisfied. It deepens. The Sith lords who consumed the Force began to lose shape, physically, spiritually. Their presence distorted reality. Sound bent, light dimmed. They became walking absences. The galaxy learned a new fear, not invasion, not conquest, consumption. Victory against these beings felt meaningless. Destroying them did not restore what was lost. Worlds remained hollow. The Force did not return. The Jedi realized too late what restraint had allowed. By narrowing the Force, They had made it vulnerable. Something could now take it. Power had learned to feed, and once hunger replaces desire, nothing is ever enough again. The Force felt this truth settle. A new kind of darkness had emerged. Not loud, not commanding, empty. An emptiness spreads faster than fire. They were no longer Sith in the old sense. Titles failed them. Names meant nothing. They were defined by what followed them. Absence. Where they walked, the Force thinned. Not disrupted, removed. Jedi who sensed them felt nausea, a hollow pressure behind thought, as if part of themselves had already been taken. These beings did not radiate anger. They radiated need. Hunger shaped their existence. They did not draw on emotion. They erased it. Fear collapsed into numbness near them. Pain dulled. Hope vanished without struggle. The Force could not flow where nothing remained to carry it. These Sith learned to hunt Force-sensitive beings first. Not for strategy, for sustenance. Each consumed Jedi left them stronger, but also less present. Their voices grew distant, their movements slowed, as if reality itself resisted holding them. They felt this resistance as suffering, and suffering drove them further. They fed on entire worlds when individuals no longer satisfied the ache, not with fleets, with presence. A planet would darken gradually, life fading unevenly, animals first, then crops, then thought. Those who survived described a feeling worse than death, a sense of being forgotten while still alive. The Force was not screaming. It was silent. Jedi attempts to confront these beings failed repeatedly. Lightsabers passed through bodies that felt half there. Force techniques collapsed mid-thought. The enemy was not resisting. There was nothing to push against. Victory required destruction, and destruction restored nothing. When these Sith were finally struck down, the damage remained. Worlds stayed empty. The Force did not return. The Jedi began to understand the cost. These beings had not corrupted the Force. They had consumed it. Something finite had been treated as endless. The Force adapted, but adaptation has limits. Entire regions became dead zones, places where sensitivity faded, where future generations would never feel what once guided the galaxy. This frightened the Jedi more than war ever had, because war destroys life. This erased possibility. Other Sith feared these entities, not out of morality, out of survival. Hunger has no allegiance. It consumes rival and master alike. These beings did not obey doctrine. They did not care for lineage. They hunted anything that felt alive in the Force, even their own kind. This turned Sith space inward, paranoid, fractured. The Republic struggled to respond. How do you defend against something that leaves nothing to defend? Entire fleets vanished approaching dead worlds, not destroyed, unmanned. Crew found drifting, alive, unaware. Their connections severed so cleanly they felt no loss. This terrified scientists, philosophers, Jedi, because it suggested the Force was not a constant. It could be diminished, and diminished permanently. The Jedi revised teachings quietly. They spoke less of balance, more of preservation. They began to treat the Force as something fragile. This shift would echo far into the future. The galaxy learned to fear absence more than pain. Pain ends. Absence remains. These Sith did not leave monuments. They left voids. Maps marked regions no one entered again. Not out of danger, out of nothingness. And in this nothingness, the Force grew cautious. It pulled back from excess, from exposure, as if protecting itself from being consumed further. The Jedi felt this withdrawal deeply, their connection weaker, their reach shorter. They had won battles. but lost ground that could never be reclaimed. The beings who consumed the Force had shown a terrifying truth. That power could end itself. That hunger, unchecked, devours even what sustains it. These Sith faded eventually, destroyed or starved, but their impact remained. Silence stretched where life once spoke, and the Force remembered, because memory is all that remains when nothing else survives. The Republic recorded these encounters as victories. Threats eliminated, targets destroyed, regions secured. On paper, the war continued to move forward. In reality, something was missing. Jedi returned from these battles changed, not traumatized, diminished. They could not explain it clearly, only that something was gone, a presence they had relied on, a current they no longer felt beneath thought. They had stopped the hunger, but they had not undone it. Worlds reclaimed from these Sith were uninhabitable, not poisoned, not burned, empty. Life could return eventually. The Force could not. Children born on these planets felt nothing, no pull, no whisper. The Jedi realized too late that victory had conditions. They could destroy the Devourer, but not restore what had been consumed. This changed how triumph felt. Celebrations were quiet, short, uncertain. Commanders spoke in lowered voices. Reports ended with questions instead of conclusions. The Force felt thinner across the galaxy, not broken, stretched, as if too much had been taken too quickly. The Jedi began to fear winning, because each success confirmed loss. They sealed off entire sectors, declared them unsafe, not because enemies remained, but because nothing did. These empty regions became scars on star charts, places no one planned for, no one hoped for. The Sith had lost something as well. Even those who opposed the Devourers felt weakened. The Force did not return to them either. It did not choose sides. It protected itself by retreating. The Republic adapted again. It reduced Jedi deployment, preserved remaining strength, avoided unnecessary exposure. This caution slowed expansion, stalled recovery. But no one argued. Everyone felt the cost. The Force no longer surged in great moments. It whispered, briefly, as if conserving breath. Victories no longer felt like turning points. They felt like containment, stopping something worse, not restoring something better. This exhausted morale, not with despair, with acceptance. The galaxy adjusted to loss. Trade routes shifted away from dead zones. Histories were rewritten to avoid questions. Whole eras were summarized quickly, without detail, because detail revealed absence. The Jedi revised their understanding again. They stopped asking how much power they could wield. They began asking how little they could risk. This caution reshaped training. Aggression discouraged. Experimentation forbidden. The Order narrowed its focus further. Survival over discovery. Preservation over growth. The Force mirrored this approach. It became reliable, predictable, but limited. The Sith had proven something dangerous. That excess invites collapse. That power taken without restraint destroys its source. The Jedi took this lesson seriously, too seriously. They mistook reduction for safety. They believed limitation would prevent future hunger. They did not see what limitation would invite instead, because emptiness does not remain empty forever. It waits. Victories continued. Battles ended. But nothing truly improved. The galaxy felt quieter, not peaceful, muted. Hope adjusted downward. Expectations lowered. People stopped asking when things would be better. They asked how long things would stay stable. This was the true legacy of those victories. a galaxy that survived, but did not recover. The Force held itself tightly, guarded, prepared. It had learned that hunger could destroy it, and it would not allow that again. Not openly, not easily, but protection comes with cost, and that cost would not be paid immediately. It would be delayed, stored, waiting for a future that did not fear restraint, a future willing to reach again. And when that reach came, the Force would answer differently, because it had learned what hunger looked like, and it would never forget. There were places the Jedi stopped visiting, not because danger remained, but because meaning did not. Worlds stripped by hunger did not call out in the Force. They did not echo. They did not remember. They simply existed, silent. Jedi sent to assess these regions returned early, not injured, not frightened, empty. They described standing on plains where cities once stood, feeling wind, seeing light, and sensing nothing beneath it. No presence, no resistance, no life waiting to grow. The Force did not avoid these worlds. It passed through them without noticing. That indifference felt worse than darkness. The Republic asked if these planets could be reclaimed, repopulated, redeveloped. The Jedi had no answers. Life could return. Technology could rebuild. But what had been taken could not be replaced. The Force was not soil. It did not regrow when disturbed too deeply. These worlds became lessons without words, warnings written in absence. The Jedi marked them as lost, not in battle, in spirit. This realization changed priorities across the galaxy. Exploration slowed, expansion halted. No one wanted to risk creating more empty places. Fear shifted again, from invasion, from domination, to depletion. The idea that something essential could be used up terrified even the Sith. Those who survived the age of hunger withdrew further. They hid knowledge, buried techniques, not out of mercy, out of fear of extinction. The Jedi believed they had prevented something worse, and they had. But the cost lingered. Every time a Jedi failed to feel the Force fully, they remembered those worlds. Every time meditation ended too quickly, they sensed what restraint had protected and what it had cost. The galaxy adapted to this new understanding. Power was treated carefully, used sparingly. Excess became taboo. The Jedi taught that the Force was not infinite, that it must be respected as a living presence. This teaching held, for a time. The Sith faded into shadows again. Their hunger starved, their legends softened. The Republic stabilized around caution. But caution does not inspire, it preserves. Generations grew up knowing safety, but not wonder. The Force flowed thinly through their lives, enough to guide, not enough to awe. This felt like progress. It felt like wisdom. But something had been lost. A sense that the galaxy could grow beyond its scars. The Force accepted this narrowing. It had survived worse. It would endure restraint. But endurance is not vitality. And vitality was what had been consumed. The Jedi told themselves there was nothing left to save in those dead regions. And they were right. But the lesson did not end there. Because what could be consumed once could be threatened again. The Force remembered hunger. It remembered pain. It remembered how close it had come to absence. And so it prepared, quietly, by limiting access, by responding less freely, by choosing patience over abundance. The galaxy mistook this for peace, but peace built on absence is fragile. Those empty worlds remained, unchanged, unhealed. They were not wounds. They were cautions. They whispered without sound. Do not take too much. Do not assume forever. The Jedi listened. The Sith remembered. The Republic recorded. And the Force waited. Because nothing left to save does not mean nothing left to lose. It means the cost has already been paid, and payment invites repetition. Someday, someone would forget these lessons. They would reach again, hungry for more than survival. When that happened, the Force would answer, not as it once had, but as something older, more careful, and far less forgiving. Armies rose faster than memory could track. They did not carry banners of belief, only marks of allegiance that changed with convenience. After the Age of Hunger, the Sith didn't slow down. They multiplied. Fragments of empires became warlords. Warlords became kings. Kings became targets. Every Sith believed themselves worthy of supremacy. Every one of them believed the Force had spared them for a reason. They raised armies not to defend worlds, but to prove dominance. Clones, slaves, fanatics drawn by fear or promise. Numbers replaced strategy. Where once the Sith had planned patiently, they now overwhelmed through volume. The galaxy felt crowded with conflict. Hyperspace lanes clogged with fleets. Planets fortified overnight. Systems changing hands without warning. The Republic struggled to name the enemy. There was no single Sith empire anymore, only endless claimants. The Jedi recognized the danger immediately. This was not a unified darkness. It was chaos wearing power like armor. Battles erupted without purpose. Entire worlds burned for pride. Populations were drafted, discarded, replaced. The Force felt loud again. Not focused, not deliberate, noisy, like too many voices shouting at once. Meditation became difficult for the Jedi. Visions overlapped. Warnings contradicted each other. The Sith did not care. They fed on the confusion. Each victory was temporary. Each loss provoked retaliation. No war ended cleanly, because no Sith accepted defeat. They simply retreated, rebuilt, returned stronger. Alliances between Sith were brief and transactional. Shared enemies created momentary unity. Success dissolved it instantly. The moment a rival weakened, betrayal followed. This cycle accelerated conflict. Battles overlapped, fronts blurred. The Republic fought one Sith Lord while another attacked its flank. Jedi redeployed constantly, never arriving in time. The galaxy entered a state of permanent emergency. Civilians learned to live under threat. Children grew up knowing evacuation drills better than history. The Sith did not notice the cost. They were too focused on escalation. Each lord believed more power would end the chaos. More ships, more soldiers, more force. They did not see that power without discipline multiplies failure. The Force reflected this excess. It surged unpredictably, spiked violently, collapsed without warning. Some Sith lost control mid-battle, abilities tearing through allies as often as enemies. Others burned themselves out entirely, consumed by the same power they hoarded. The Jedi observed this with dread, because this chaos did not weaken the Sith immediately. It strengthened them in bursts, short-lived, explosive, unstable. Worlds were annihilated in moments of uncontrolled power, then forgotten. No one stayed to rule ruins. Armies marched on, chasing the next confrontation. The Sith Wars became self-sustaining. They no longer required ideology. Conflict itself became the goal. The Republic tried to counter with unity, with coordinated campaigns, with restraint. But restraint struggled against excess. The Jedi found themselves fighting fires everywhere, never extinguishing them completely. Every Sith killed created two more contenders. Every fortress destroyed spawned a new stronghold elsewhere. The Force felt strained by repetition, conflict after conflict layered upon itself. It no longer amplified ambition cleanly. It distorted it. The Sith mistook this distortion for evolution. They believed they were becoming stronger. In truth, they were becoming louder. And loud power attracts attention. From enemies, from rivals, from consequences. The galaxy was drowning in armies without end, not marching toward victory, marching toward collapse. The Jedi sensed something approaching, not a final battle, an exhaustion point, a moment when power would turn inward. Because endless armies do not create stability, they consume it. And the Sith, obsessed with proving supremacy, did not realize they were building the conditions for their own destruction. The war had not peaked yet, but it was already unsustainable. The Force knew this. It waited, because excess always corrects itself. Violently. Trust never existed among the Sith. It was imitated, borrowed, and discarded the moment it stopped being useful. Alliances formed in whispers and ended in screams. A Sith would swear loyalty in the morning and plot murder by night. Betrayal was not failure. It was expectation. Masters trained apprentices knowing they would one day be challenged. Apprentices learned patience not to serve, but to wait. Power was proven through survival, and survival required removing rivals before they struck first. This belief hardened into habit. Habit became culture. In this age, the Sith did not fear treachery. They planned for it, measured it, and rewarded those who struck without hesitation. Rival Sith Lords watched each other more closely than they watched the Jedi. Campaigns were designed not only to defeat enemies, but to expose weakness among allies. Fleets arrived late on purpose. Reinforcements failed to appear. Information was withheld, altered, or sold. When a battle was lost, blame became a weapon sharper than any blade. Accusations justified executions. Executions justified succession. The Sith believed this constant purging refined strength. Only the most ruthless would remain. What they did not see was erosion. Trust collapsed entirely, forcing every leader to divide attention between war and paranoia, draining focus from strategy and turning victory into survival. This obsession spread through every command chamber, poisoning decisions, slowing responses, and ensuring that no Sith could ever fully commit to any cause again ever. Apprentices learned quickly that loyalty shortened life. They studied their masters not to emulate them, but to map their weaknesses. Every lesson carried an unspoken test. Every gesture was measured. Power was shared sparingly, never freely. The Sith called this balance. In truth, it was fear wearing discipline. As betrayals multiplied, bloodlines shattered, knowledge fragmented, rituals were lost when their keepers were slain too early. Each generation started again from broken pieces, convinced they were stronger than the last, unaware they were relearning the same mistakes. This cycle rewarded ambition, but punished continuity, ensuring that the Sith grew louder, crueler, and more desperate, even as their understanding of the Force became increasingly shallow and unstable over time and across generations without pause or reflection or restraint at all ever. Jedi intelligence reports described the Sith Wars as irrational. That assessment missed the truth. The conflict was not madness. It was inevitability. A system built on betrayal consumes itself. Sith armies collapsed mid-campaign when leaders turned inward. Battles ended not by defeat, but by assassination. Fleets drifted leaderless while rivals fought elsewhere. The Republic advanced not through brilliance, but because the enemy devoured itself faster than it could be opposed. Each collapse encouraged another challenger. Each challenger accelerated destruction, until power existed only in flashes, leaving scorched systems and broken chains of command that no longer remembered why the war had begun. History blurred, motives dissolved, and violence replaced purpose as the only remaining proof of dominance within fractured Sith space everywhere, without pause or mercy remaining at all. The Sith believed betrayal proved strength. In truth, it revealed fragility. Power consumed by suspicion cannot endure. As rivals eliminated rivals, knowledge died with them. Strategies vanished. Patience disappeared. What remained was noise, endless conflict without direction. The Jedi did not defeat the Sith through superior might. They survived long enough for the Sith to collapse under their own weight, leaving behind ruins, legends, and a warning the galaxy would remember only when it was almost too late. This end did not feel like justice or relief, only inevitability, as power devoured itself and cleared the way for a quieter, more dangerous shadow to learn from every mistake, waiting patiently beyond history and memory alone, until the galaxy repeated everything again, without understanding or restraint or wisdom ever again. Power stopped meaning control. It became sound, loud, violent, unstable. The Sith no longer shaped the Force. They shouted into it. Each lord tried to outdo the last. Bigger rituals, brighter destruction, stronger displays. Subtlety vanished. Patience was mocked. Silence was weakness. The Force reacted badly. It surged without warning, exploded without direction, collapsed mid-command. Battles became spectacles. Planets burned not for strategy, but for intimidation. Entire systems were erased to send messages no one listened to. The Sith believed this was dominance. It was desperation. Power was no longer guided by purpose. It was unleashed without restraint. Lightning tore through armies indiscriminately. Force waves shattered allies and enemies alike. Control slipped. Every display demanded a greater one to follow. This escalation fed nothing. It only emptied. The Jedi felt it immediately. The Force screamed across space, not in pain, in overload. Meditation failed. Visions arrived fractured, contradictory. Too many futures at once. The Sith mistook this chaos for evolution. They believed the Force was growing stronger. In truth, it was being abused. Power used without discipline does not deepen, it frays. Some Sith burned out in moments of excess, their bodies unable to contain what they summoned. Others survived, but changed, unstable, erratic, consumed by constant need to prove strength. Command structures collapsed. Orders contradicted each other mid-battle. Fleets destroyed themselves responding to overlapping commands. The Republic barely needed strategy. It advanced cautiously through the noise, waiting for the explosions to stop. Worlds caught between Sith clashes were annihilated accidentally. No conquest followed, no rule established, just absence. The galaxy learned a new terror, not Sith ambition, Sith recklessness. Power had become unpredictable, no longer a tool, a hazard. The Force reflected this loss of control. It resisted amplification. It snapped back violently. Some Sith lost access entirely. Others became addicted to brief surges, short moments of godlike power, followed by emptiness. This cycle destroyed discipline, destroyed learning, destroyed legacy. The Sith stopped teaching. They demonstrated. Apprentices learned through imitation, not understanding. This made them louder, not wiser. Knowledge became fragmented, rituals half-learned, techniques misused, every error amplified. The Jedi watched from a distance. They saw a truth forming. The Sith were not becoming unstoppable. They were becoming unsustainable. Power without restraint creates collapse. The Sith had removed every boundary. There was nothing left to slow them, No hierarchy, no patience, no silence, only noise. The Force grew hostile toward excess, not by choice, by necessity. It began rejecting those who pushed too far. Abilities failed at critical moments. Rituals backfired. Entire cult strongholds imploded. The Sith called this sabotage. They blamed rivals. They never blamed themselves. Each disaster provoked more excess, more displays, more destruction. The spiral tightened. The Jedi felt something approaching. Not a victory, an implosion. Power was eating itself alive. The Sith had achieved what no enemy ever could. They made the Force unusable through overuse. The galaxy shook under constant surges. Hyperspace lanes destabilized. Stars flickered. Reality felt thin near major conflicts. This was not war anymore. It was collapse in motion. The Sith did not see an ending. They saw only the next display, the next eruption, the next proof. But proof without meaning is just noise, and noise always fades. The Force waited for silence, because silence was the only thing that could follow this. The end did not come as a final battle. It came as absence of one. The Sith were everywhere, and nowhere united. Armies collided without coordination. Rituals overlapped and failed. Orders contradicted each other mid-breath. Power no longer answered cleanly. The Force resisted excess with collapse. Sith strongholds imploded from within, not attacked. Overloaded. Lords destroyed their own fortresses trying to prove supremacy. Apprentices struck too early. Masters retaliated too late. No one waited. Waiting felt like weakness. Every Sith believed the end would spare them. They were wrong. The galaxy watched Sith space tear itself apart, world by world, fleet by fleet, not through conquest, through implosion, civil wars within civil wars, betrayals layered upon betrayals. A Sith would seize power at dawn and be dead by nightfall. Knowledge vanished faster than it could be recorded. Holocrons destroyed in rage. Ancient techniques lost when their wielders died alone. The Force grew quiet again, not cold, relieved, as if pressure had been released. The Jedi advanced carefully, not to conquer, to survive what remained. They found ruins instead of resistance, burned worlds without defenders, armies fighting shadows of rivals already dead. Victory required almost no effort, and that terrified them, because something so powerful should not end so easily. The Jedi understood then. The Sith had not been defeated. They had consumed themselves. Power without restraint had no structure left to stand on. The Republic reclaimed territory slowly, not celebrating, documenting damage. Entire regions were unstable, hyperspace fractured, the Force unreliable. No single Sith Lord remained to challenge them. Only remnants, scavengers, survivors hiding in the wreckage. The Jedi hunted cautiously. They did not want another Revan. They did not want another hunger. They dismantled what remained piece by piece. The Sith Order, as it had existed, was gone, not erased. Broken. Its greatest weapon had turned inward. Excess. The galaxy entered an unfamiliar quiet. No massive fleets, no ritual shockwaves, just exhaustion. The Jedi gathered to understand what had happened. They did not declare triumph. They recorded warnings. Power had not saved the Sith. Power had ended them. The Force had not abandoned balance. It had enforced it, brutally, by allowing excess to collapse under its own weight. This lesson settled deep into Jedi doctrine. Never again allow power to grow unchecked. Never again allow ambition to multiply freely. Control was necessary. Limitation was safety. The Sith had unknowingly written their own ending. They proved that domination without discipline destroys itself, but endings are never clean. Fragments survived. Ideas endure longer than empires. Some Sith escaped into hiding, not strong enough to rule, smart enough to wait. They carried lessons learned from failure, not how to conquer, how to endure. The Jedi did not sense them clearly. The Force was too quiet, too still. That stillness felt like peace. But peace built on exhaustion is fragile. The Sith Wars were over. But the darkness had learned something important. That loud power dies quickly, that patience survives. The galaxy believed the threat was ended. History would record it that way. But history rarely sees what waits in silence. Because silence does not announce itself. It watches, it remembers, and it adapts. The Sith had destroyed themselves, but they had also prepared the ground for something smaller, quieter, far more dangerous. The Force felt it settle, not as fear, as inevitability. The war was over, the shadow was not. He did not arrive to save the Sith. He arrived after they were already dying. While empires burned themselves into dust, one Sith watched, not from a throne, from the shadows. He saw armies fail, saw betrayals repeat, saw power wasted through noise. Where others felt rage, he felt understanding. The Sith had not been defeated by the Jedi. They had been defeated by themselves. Crowds diluted strength. Numbers invited betrayal. Loud power collapsed inward. He studied the ruins carefully, not with grief, with focus. Every fallen Sith Lord told the same story. Too many voices, too many ambitions. Masters killed by apprentices too soon. Apprentices killed before learning enough. Knowledge lost, patience erased. The Force had not abandoned the Sith. The Sith had abused it. He understood something others never had. Power does not survive crowds. It sharpens in solitude. This Sith did not seek revenge. He sought correction. He walked through dead academies, silent halls where holocrons lay shattered. He gathered what fragments remained, techniques, warnings, failures. He learned more from collapse than victory ever taught. The Jedi believed the Sith were finished. They sensed no armies, no rituals, no noise. They were right and wrong, because the most dangerous predators do not announce themselves. This Sith understood patience. He understood that survival required invisibility. While the Jedi rebuilt doctrine around caution, he rebuilt the Sith around endurance. He did not recruit. Recruitment creates witnesses. He did not conquer. Conquest invites response. He waited. Years passed. Decades. The galaxy healed enough to forget fear. That forgetting created space. In that space, the Sith survivor refined his vision. One master, one apprentice, no more. Not because of mercy, because of efficiency. Two minds, one purpose. The master to hold knowledge, the apprentice to crave it. One to teach restraint, one to test ambition. When the apprentice struck, it would be earned, not chaotic, not rushed. If the apprentice failed, they were not ready. If they succeeded, the Sith continued. Knowledge preserved, power focused. The survivor saw clearly now. The Jedi thrived on visibility, councils, temples, order. The Sith would thrive on absence. No banners, no fleets, no attention, only influence. He imagined centuries, not campaigns. Bloodlines of thought. Ideas passed quietly. While the Jedi guarded peace openly, the Sith would shape it secretly. This was not retreat. It was evolution. The Force felt different around this idea. Calm. As if approving restraint. The Sith survivor took this as confirmation. Not destiny. Alignment. He waited for the right apprentice. Not the strongest. The hungriest. One who could endure silence. One who could wait years without reward. When he finally chose, He did not announce it. There were no witnesses, only a quiet transfer of purpose. The galaxy did not notice. That was the point. The Sith had learned the most important lesson of all, that survival is not about domination. It is about continuation. Empires fall. Ideas persist. The Sith would no longer burn brightly. They would burn slowly, hidden, patient, watching. The Jedi believed darkness had ended. They felt only stillness. But stillness can hide intent. An intent, once focused, does not need armies. It only needs time. The rule of two was born not from hatred, but from memory, from watching everything fail and deciding never to repeat it. Failure was not mysterious. It was consistent. The Sith believed strength grew by gathering more of itself, more followers, more rivals, more ambition in one place. That belief destroyed them every time. Crowds create friction. Friction creates impatience. Impatience creates mistakes. The Sith mistook numbers for stability. They built hierarchies layered with resentment, each layer waiting for collapse. Power shared too widely becomes contested. Contested power fractures. Every Sith empire carried the same weakness. Too many desires, too many futures. Masters feared apprentices. Apprentices hated waiting. This hatred shortened lifespans. Training became rushed. Knowledge passed incomplete. Techniques used without understanding. The Force responded unevenly. Some grew strong quickly. Others burned out. No one lasted. The Sith called this natural selection. It was waste. Every betrayal erased knowledge. Every execution erased progress. The Jedi noticed patterns the Sith ignored. Sith empires peaked fast, collapsed faster, not because the Jedi struck hard, because the Sith struck each other harder. Ambition without patience is loud. A loud power attracts rivals. Rivals attract chaos. The Sith could not stop competing. They believed competition refined strength. It actually fragmented it. Each lord guarded secrets, hoarded techniques, refused collaboration. When they died, knowledge died with them. This reset progress constantly. Generations repeated the same experiments, made the same mistakes, called them innovation. The Force does not reward repetition. It responds to clarity. Too many Sith meant too many intentions pulling at once. The Force strained. It amplified extremes, punished imbalance. Entire empires collapsed under sudden instability. Rituals backfired. Plans unraveled. The Sith blamed enemies. They never blamed structure. They did not see that betrayal had become a requirement. A Sith who trusted another did not survive. So trust vanished completely. Without trust, nothing complex could endure. Armies turned inward. Councils dissolved. Commanders assassinated. The Jedi fought enemies. The Sith fought mirrors. This difference mattered. The Sith believed fear controlled the galaxy. But fear consumes energy. It demands constant reinforcement. Constant enforcement creates fatigue. Fatigue invites collapse. The Jedi endured because restraint limited damage. The Sith collapsed because excess multiplied it. Power without limits accelerates failure. Every Sith empire followed the same arc. Rapid expansion, internal conflict, sudden collapse. The galaxy learned to expect it. The Jedi learned to wait. The Sith mistook resistance for challenge. It was patience. This cycle repeated for centuries. No Sith asked why. They assumed dominance was proof enough. But dominance without endurance is noise. Noise fades. The survivor understood this. He saw that the Sith did not fail because they were weak. They failed because they were many. Too many voices, too many egos, too many endings. Strength did not survive crowds. It dissolved inside them. The rule of two was not cruelty. It was correction. One to hold knowledge, one to crave it. No audience, no competition, only transfer, only focus. This removed the cycle of betrayal. It slowed ambition without extinguishing it. It preserved knowledge instead of scattering it. The Sith had always believed extinction came from enemies. The truth was simpler. They destroyed themselves through abundance. The survivor did not hate the old Sith. He learned from them. Every failure became instruction. Every collapse became evidence. The Jedi believed the Sith ended in fire. In truth, they ended in misunderstanding. They never realized why they kept losing, until one of them finally watched, and chose silence instead. Darkness did not disappear. It stepped back. After centuries of noise, silence became its shield. The Sith stopped announcing themselves, stopped conquering openly, stopped demanding attention. They learned that visibility invites destruction. The rule of two demanded something new: discipline. The master hid knowledge carefully. The apprentice hid hunger even more carefully. No armies marched, no banners rose. The galaxy saw peace. The Jedi sensed balance returning. That belief kept them calm. The Sith used that calm. They embedded themselves quietly, in trade guilds, in political offices, in criminal networks. Influence replaced invasion. Manipulation replaced conquest. A single whispered decision could reshape a sector. Without a single ship firing, the Sith learned to value patience over power. Waiting became strategy. Decades passed between actions, sometimes centuries. The Jedi watched for signs of aggression, for rituals, for sudden surges in the Force. None came, because the Sith stopped using power loudly. They conserved it. The Force responded differently to this restraint. It flowed quietly, subtly, almost invisibly. This made the Sith harder to detect. Meditation revealed nothing alarming. No screams, no distortions, only calm. The Jedi mistook calm for absence. They did not realize calm could be shaped. The Sith learned to act through others. Wars were encouraged without involvement. Conflicts sparked and left to burn. The Sith did not fight these wars. They profited from them. Each conflict weakened institutions, created resentment, opened wounds. The Sith fed on opportunity, not energy. They avoided direct use of the Force unless necessary. Power saved was power preserved. The Master taught secrecy as doctrine. No apprentices beyond one, no allies beyond necessity. If an apprentice grew impatient, they were not ready. If they revealed themselves, they were corrected, harshly. The rule of two punished exposure. Silence was survival. The Jedi Order changed as well. They became comfortable with peace, focused on maintenance, on tradition. Threats were categorized, measured, responded to. The Sith did not fit categories. They were not an army, not a cult. They were a process, slow, invisible, inevitable. The Force did not warn of this change, because nothing felt wrong. That was the brilliance. Darkness learned to exist without disturbance. The Sith manipulated bloodlines, engineered conflicts generations in advance. A law passed here, a leader removed there. The galaxy shifted incrementally. No one noticed the pattern. The Jedi sensed imbalance only when effects surfaced, too late to trace origins. The Sith did not rush the end of the Jedi. They allowed them to weaken themselves through complacency, through politics, through distance from suffering. The rule of two thrived on long games. One failure did not matter, only continuation. If a master fell, the apprentice survived. If an apprentice failed, the master endured. The Sith never vanished again. They learned from extinction. They would never risk it twice. The galaxy entered an age of false security, centuries without open Sith presence. Stories faded into legend, warnings softened into myth. The Jedi trusted history to repeat loudly. They did not expect it to whisper. Darkness learned patience. It learned how to wait until belief eroded, until vigilance dulled, until peace created vulnerability. This was the true victory, not the fall of worlds, but the fall of certainty. The Sith no longer needed to win battles. They needed time, and time, once given, belongs to whoever knows how to use it. The Jedi believed they had peace. The Sith believed they had the future. Both were correct. For a while. The rule of two was not built for victory. It was built for survival. Everything else was secondary. The master carried memory, failures, warnings, patience earned through loss. The apprentice carried hunger, ambition, restlessness. Together, they formed balance. Not light, not dark, continuity. The master did not rule openly. They guided from behind decisions, from behind shadows. They shaped events without leaving fingerprints. The apprentice learned slowly, not power first, understanding first. Years passed without reward, without recognition. This tested desire. Those who could not wait were discarded. The Sith learned restraint through scarcity. One voice, one lesson, one future at a time. Knowledge was no longer scattered. It was curated, techniques preserved carefully, holocrons hidden, not displayed. Nothing was shared without reason. The Force responded to this discipline. It did not recoil. It aligned. Quiet power did not strain it. It flowed cleanly. The Sith no longer burned themselves out. They conserved. They studied the Jedi deeply, their strengths, their blind spots. The Sith learned that the Jedi feared imbalance more than darkness. So imbalance was introduced slowly, through politics, through corruption, through fear disguised as order. The Sith did not rush collapse. They engineered dependency. The Republic began to rely on control, on surveillance, on authority. The Jedi became administrators, mediators, bureaucrats. Distance grew between them and suffering. The Sith waited. Each generation refined the plan. Mistakes were analyzed, corrected, never repeated. The apprentice learned that killing the master was not revenge. It was succession. If done too early, the Sith failed. If done at the right moment, the Sith endured. This rule prevented chaos, prevented noise, prevented extinction. The Sith became ghosts, legends without proof. The Jedi searched for armies that no longer existed, for rituals that no longer flared. They did not search for influence, because influence leaves no trace in the Force. The Sith understood something critical, that domination invites resistance, but guidance reshapes consent. They did not want to destroy the Jedi. They wanted them irrelevant, bound by rules, restricted by caution. The Sith thrived on flexibility. The galaxy changed slowly, crisis by crisis. Each one nudged in the right direction. The Sith did not need to win every move. They needed to never lose the long game. This was endurance. This was evolution. The rule of two ensured that no Sith would ever again be wasted. No knowledge lost to betrayal. No power diluted by crowds. Every generation built upon the last. The Sith had learned from annihilation. They would never be loud again. They would never be careless. They would never be many. The Jedi believed darkness had ended. They felt only faint disturbances. They called them anomalies. They dismissed them. The Sith remained, waiting, adapting. preparing for a future the Jedi were not guarding against. A future where control replaced freedom, where fear disguised itself as safety. The rule of two endured because it respected limits. Limits preserved power. Excess destroyed it. This was the final lesson of the Sith Wars, that survival favors those who learn when to stop. The Sith had stopped conquering. They had started planning. The galaxy moved forward, unaware. Peace felt stable. Balance felt secure. But beneath it, an order built to endure watched everything. Silent, patient, unseen. The darkness had changed forever, and the Jedi would not realize it until it was already too late. The Old Republic did not collapse in fire. It thinned, quietly. After centuries of survival, after wars that reshaped stars, the galaxy learned how to live without listening. Peace settled in layers, not earned, maintained. Systems stabilized. Trade returned. Borders stopped moving. The Republic looked strong, but strength had become habit. The Jedi felt this first, not as danger, as distance. The Force no longer surged in moments of decision. It guided gently, predictably. That felt comforting. The Council welcomed it. After endless wars, quiet felt like balance, but quiet can hide decay. The Jedi Order grew careful. Rules hardened, interpretations narrowed, doctrine replaced instinct. Young Jedi learned history as warning, not as question. They were taught what had gone wrong, not what might go wrong again. The Republic mirrored this shift. Senates grew large, decisions slowed, consensus mattered more than urgency. No one wanted another Revan, another civil war, another era of noise, so risk was avoided, again and again. The Force responded to this caution. It flowed evenly, safely, never loudly. This reinforced belief. That restraint worked. That limitation preserved peace. But preservation is not growth. Worlds on the edges began to feel ignored. Outer systems received less protection, less attention. The Republic was too busy maintaining itself. The Jedi were too busy enforcing balance. Corruption did not arrive suddenly. It crept through procedures, through exceptions, through compromises no one remembered making. The Sith were gone. That truth shaped everything. Without an enemy, the Republic defined itself by survival alone, not purpose. The Jedi defined themselves by prevention, not understanding. The Force felt thinner here, not absent, muted, as if waiting for something to ask more of it. But no one did. Centuries passed like this. Records were kept. Wars were studied. But lessons softened with time. The horrors of the Old Republic became stories. Stories became legends. Legends became comfort. The Jedi believed the Sith extinct. They trusted history. They trusted silence. They did not consider patience. The Force did not warn them, because nothing felt wrong. That was the danger. The Old Republic began to fade, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too long without challenge. Stability bred complacency. Complacency dulled awareness. The Jedi sat at the center of power now. Respected. Trusted. That trust carried weight, and weight slows movement. The Force adjusted. It followed restraint. It echoed caution. It became orderly. But order without curiosity stagnates. The galaxy moved forward, but it carried shadows, unexamined, unquestioned. Old fears buried under procedure. Old mistakes sealed inside doctrine. The Old Republic did not know it was fading, because fading feels like rest, like relief, like safety. The Jedi felt peace. The Republic felt control. Neither felt urgency. And urgency is what keeps shadows from growing. In this stillness, history held its breath, waiting. Because silence does not mean resolution. It means something is being carried forward, quietly, patiently, unseen. Ghosts lived inside rules the Jedi recited without question daily. They were lessons learned too well, then frozen into law. After endless wars, safety became sacred and experimentation quietly forbidden. Doctrine hardened around fear of repeating histories, blood-stained catastrophes again. Attachments discouraged emotions, restrained choices narrowed for every generation afterward. This was wisdom shaped by trauma, not malice or cruelty. Yet trauma preserved becomes architecture rather than memory alone now. The Jedi trained guardians to avoid darkness by avoiding depth. They studied balance through manuals, not lived contradiction anymore today. Old warnings became procedures, repeated until meaning thinned away slowly. The Force responded politely to structure, but withdrew from curiosity. Visions softened, intuition, dulled surprises became rare across the galaxy. Masters praised consistency above insight, discipline above listening always now. Students learned obedience faster than understanding consequences of power use. Ghosts of past failures guided decisions invisibly within council's chambers. The Republic adopted similar habits, preferring process over purpose itself. Laws multiplied to prevent emergencies before they began anywhere else. Oversight replaced trust, security replaced courage through endless committees today. The Jedi became administrators of peace rather than explorers anymore. This shift felt responsible, necessary, even noble to most observers. But doctrine carries shadows when fear writes footnotes into law. Old Sith lessons were remembered only as prohibitions, not understanding. No one studied how darkness adapted after defeat and waited. The Jedi trusted extinction as permanent resolution of ancient threats. That trust became a blindfold worn comfortably by the Order. The Force did not contradict their beliefs during this era. It followed caution, reflecting caution, amplifying restraint across generations everywhere. This feedback loop convinced leaders they were correct about everything. Ghosts became invisible precisely because they were familiar to everyone. Familiarity breeds neglect, neglect breeds repetition without awareness ever today. The Jedi guarded balance by narrowing acceptable futures year after. Possibility shrank quietly without protest from systems and minds everywhere. The Republic mistook predictability for justice and fairness always now. In doing so, it inherited ancient mistakes without knowing origins. The ghosts did not haunt, they instructed through rules alone. Every safeguard carried an echo of old fear, unspoken still. Fear shaped curricular councils, laws, and expectations across the Republic. The Jedi believed they had learned everything necessary to survive. They did not realize learning had stopped quietly long ago. The Force waited because waiting had worked before for darkness. Ghosts inside doctrine kept history repeating politely behind careful language. The Republic aged without noticing its own inheritance from ruins. Peace continued, but vigilance narrowed dangerously through comfort and routine. The Jedi mistook calm doctrine for wisdom earned by time. Ghosts smiled because no one questioned them anymore at all. Inheritance is dangerous when unexamined, especially across peaceful centuries now. The Old Republic carried these ghosts forward toward unseen futures. They would surface again under different names and familiar fears. Doctrine preserved stability while postponing reckoning with the darkness itself. The ghosts waited patient as the Force allowed history onward. The long game did not begin suddenly. It resumed. While the Republic believed history had ended, someone remembered that it never does. In the quiet between crises, in the calm that felt permanent, Movement began. Not fleets, not armies. Influence. Small decisions shifted outcomes. Votes tipped quietly. Appointments changed hands. Nothing dramatic. Nothing alarming. The Jedi sensed nothing unusual, because nothing felt aggressive. The Force remained calm, measured, orderly. That order was being used. The Sith no longer needed power displays. They needed leverage. A law passed that limited Jedi authority. Another increased oversight. Both felt reasonable. Both felt safe. The Republic welcomed them. Stability mattered more than speed now. The Jedi accepted these changes without resistance. They trusted the system they protected. That trust became the opening. Conflicts were encouraged far from the core. Trade disputes escalated slowly. Local wars burned without Jedi attention. The Republic was too large to respond quickly. The Jedi too bound by protocol. The Force felt distant in these regions, not absent, ignored. Suffering went unnoticed long enough to harden resentment. That resentment was useful. Political figures rose promising order, promising security, promising protection from chaos. They spoke calmly, reasonably. The Jedi did not oppose them. They saw no darkness in words. The Sith did not rush revelation. They remembered the cost of noise. Every step was small, every gain reversible. That is how endurance works. Generations passed. The Jedi studied ancient threats. They did not study modern influence. They searched for shadows that screamed, not ones that whispered. The Force did not warn them, because the Force responds to intent, not ideology. Intent was hidden. Patience shaped everything. The Sith adjusted plans across decades, corrected errors, waited again. If one attempt failed, another followed quietly. There was no desperation, only time. The Republic began to change shape, more centralized, more controlled. Fear of instability justified every shift. The Jedi helped enforce these systems, believing they preserved peace. They did not see they were being positioned. The long game required cooperation, not resistance. The Sith studied Jedi behavior closely. They knew restraint was reflex now. They knew hesitation came first. So they acted in spaces between action. Moments when rules delayed response. Moments when consensus stalled. The Force felt thinner around these choices, but never wrong. Wrongness requires contrast. There was none. Everything looked legal, orderly, approved. The Jedi believed balance meant stillness. The Sith knew balance could be redirected. By the time unrest reached the core, structures were already in place. Emergency powers, temporary measures, each one logical, each one accepted. The Jedi advised patience. That advice sealed the pattern, because patience favors those already prepared. The long game had moved far enough, not to victory, to inevitability. The Sith did not need to strike. The galaxy was reshaping itself. The Force began to feel something new, not darkness, momentum, quiet, unstoppable. The kind that only appears when change is already happening. The Jedi felt unease then. But unease without evidence fades. They returned to doctrine. The Sith continued forward, because the long game always wins when no one believes it is being played. The future did not arrive suddenly. It inherited. Mistakes do not vanish when wars end. They are taught carefully, quietly. The Jedi passed caution forward as wisdom. They passed restraint as virtue. They passed fear of excess as law. Each lesson made sense on its own. Together, they formed blindness. Young Jedi were trained to avoid conflict, not understand it. They learned to suppress emotion, did not examine it. They learned obedience faster than awareness. This felt safe. It felt responsible. but safety dulls perception. The Republic did the same. It inherited procedures meant for crisis and treated them as permanent. Emergency powers became tradition. Oversight became normal. Fear of instability justified control. No one remembered why the rules existed, only that breaking them felt dangerous. The Force reflected this inheritance. It flowed narrowly, predictably. It did not challenge belief, it followed it. The Jedi mistook this cooperation for harmony. They did not ask what had been lost. History became curated. The Old Republic was remembered as success. Its failures softened, its warnings summarized. The Sith became myth, then metaphor, then irrelevance. The Jedi trusted extinction. They trusted silence. They trusted that patience meant peace. They did not trust curiosity. And curiosity is what notices change. The galaxy moved forward, carrying these assumptions. A new generation grew under their weight. They did not know the Old Republic's wars. They knew its order. They did not feel hunger for understanding. They felt comfort in structure. The Sith relied on this inheritance. They needed the Jedi predictable, bound, cautious. They needed the Republic confident in control. They needed fear disguised as wisdom. Everything aligned. The Force felt this inheritance settle. It did not resist. It remembered. Because memory is the Force's longest shadow. Centuries later, a child would be born into this system, sensitive, powerful, shaped by rules that feared him before he acted. Another would be trained to suppress attachment, and then punished for failing. Another would be told the dark side was temptation, not consequence. The Old Republic's ghosts would reach them, not as warnings, as expectations. Mistakes were passed forward, not through malice, but through certainty. Certainty that the past was finished. Certainty that balance had been achieved. Certainty that silence meant safety. The Force watched all of this. It did not intervene. Because intervention had consequences too. The Old Republic did not die. It echoed into the Jedi Order that followed, into the Republic that became an empire, into choices that felt reasonable until they were irreversible. The Skywalkers would inherit these echoes, not knowing their source, feeling only weight, pressure, destiny shaped by history no one questioned. This was the final legacy, not the Sith, not the Jedi, but unexamined inheritance. The galaxy believed it had moved on. In truth, it was repeating itself, with better intentions and greater consequences. The shadow of the Old Republic stretched far, quiet, unnoticed, reaching into the future that believed it was free.